Hello and welcome to the Herald's live stream for Budget Day 2023. I'm Madison Reedy.
And I'm Liam Dan. We'll be your hosts this afternoon, bringing you all the news and numbers as they're announced from 2 p.m. today.
Well, it's already been dubbed the no-frills budget by Prime Minister Chris Hipkins. But will it be? With households struggling with their own budgets and the damage from Cyclone Gabrielle and the North Island floods set to cost up to $14 billion, the government is juggling some pretty expensive priorities. Liam, just how challenging of an economic environment is Grant Robertson having to deliver this year's budget into?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. Election year aside, it's the fact that we've got an economy that's been too hot, too much inflation. Now it's starting to slow down, so there's recessionary stuff going on. It's potentially the worst of both worlds. So I guess they're going to be under pressure to relieve the cost of living for a whole bunch of people, but any extra spending they do is going to be needed to come from borrowing, more debt, and they're going to get attacked by the opposition for adding to inflation. So new spending puts money into the economy and potentially means that the Reserve Bank's job's harder and that the OCR could go up, costing people out the other end.
Certainly a tough budget politically too. This is an election year. We have an election in October, just 5 months from today. This could be one of Labor's last efforts to try to win some votes here. We've heard lots of talk about there possibly being some cost of living relief coming with today's budget. The opposition has suggested that could include some tax relief. What options could the government be looking at?
Yeah, I don't think people should be holding their breath for big tax changes. That may be coming further down the line in the sort of election promises. But today, I think it's going to be very targeted. There's a possibility of some tinkering with the tax rates, but I think more likely you're going to see something with for working families, things like that. They are very aware that of that juggling act, with putting more money into the economy. So, it's a tough one. The economy is, it's a sales job for Grant Robertson in a way to deliver on some of these things, including the big cyclone spend that we're going to have to do, but also present an image of being fiscally responsible. And I think that's what they're going to be selling the hardest, is this fiscally responsible line. Certainly
a tough one for him today, and we'll wait and see what's in it just in a moment. Well, a lot of budgets these days are pre-announced, so let's take a look at what we already know about 2023's budget. Budget 2023 was given its nickname early on.
A no-frills budget.
Delivered in one of the toughest economic times of a generation.
This has been a very difficult budget to put together for two reasons. One, the economic circumstances that we are in as a country, and secondly, the cyclone.
Cyclone Gabrielle and deadly floods across the North Island have thrown spanners in the government's works.
It's made for a very difficult set of decisions and trade-offs in Budget 2023.
Treasury has put the cost of repairing the damage at between $9 and $14.5 billion, making this year's budget an infrastructure essential one. About $2 billion of the recovery spend has already been announced and will come from within the existing budget operating allowance or multi-year capital allowance.
We're more than doubling the funding that we've already put into the cyclone recovery, with an extra $1 billion in funding through this year's budget.
There's also an extra $100 million in flood protection measures for local councils, and up to $40 million being spent to rebuild State Highway 25, reconnecting the Coromandel Peninsula.
We do anticipate seeing a lot more weather events creating disruption on our roads. This is the reality of living in an era of climate change.
Forestry slash is in the fold too, with $10 million being made available to clean up and manage debris in Gisborne and the Hawke's Bay. The education system has been given $500 million already to repair hundreds of cyclone-damaged schools, build 4 new schools, and 300 more classrooms nationwide. Winning votes may be harder. The government will be trying to juggle all the necessary spending while looking financially responsible, with inflation at historic highs and households struggling. The last few Labour budgets have been big spenders. 2022's budget went hard on the cost of living, announcing cash payments of $350 directly into Kiwis' bank accounts if they earned less than $70,000 a year. 2021 was a big boost for beneficiaries. Labour announced an increase in all benefits by $20 a week, with the aim of bringing more children out of poverty. 2020 was the COVID-19 response and recovery budget, aka the jobs budget, where the government announced a $50 billion COVID recovery fund, extending wage subsidies and job seeker support to keep New Zealanders employed and paid.
And then there is the now traditional pandemic, natural disaster or global economic shock that accompanies our budgets.
To pay for it all, the government is expected to borrow $128 billion over a 5-year period, with a return to surplus in June 2025. Any new borrowing would increase that total bill and could keep us in debt for longer. Something the opposition says should not be an option.
For the last 6 years, I think taxpayers have been completely abused by this government. It is spending $1 billion each and every week, more than when it came into office.
Our net debt was sitting at 19% of GDP in March 2023, below the current debt ceiling of 30%. That's lower than Australia, the UK and the United States debt levels, according to the International Monetary Fund. The Finance Minister has had to find an extra $4 billion by cutting non-priority projects to ensure it goes to the most pressing of taxpayers' problems. All right, well, we have a stacked lineup here for you this afternoon. We're about to go live to our political editor, Claire Trevett, who has been in a budget lockup in Parliament for almost 4 hours now, going over all of this year's budget details. We then will go to Grant Robertson, Finance Minister in the House, as he delivers this budget for the first time publicly. But I know we have Claire on the line, so Claire, take it away. What's in this year's budget?
Yeah, well, it was billed as no frills, and it had as many frills as a concrete post. If you're the parent of a small child, rejoice, because the cost of living package is very much targeted at parents and families, and it isn't that generous. It is, they are expanding early childhood education, 20 hours free to 2-year-olds, to include those, so that'll save parents of 1-year-olds currently about $130 a week. It doesn't kick in until 2024, however. They are also making public transport free for all primary school aged children and half price for anyone who's aged under 25, and it benefiting secondary school students and tertiary students, of course. And they are removing the $5 co-charge on prescriptions for everybody who needs them. And those are the key elements of the cost of living package. As signalled, it's very much aimed at making things a bit cheaper for people rather than giving people money to kind of spend as they want. Grant Robertson made it clear his main aim was trying to keep inflation on as damp as he possibly could, because the best way to help with the cost of living is to bring inflation down. On the forecast, that's due to get back to the 3% kind of Reserve Bank threshold by September next year. The mystery tax, there was some promotion around what tax changes there might be in the budget. And that tax is they're increasing the trustee tax rate to 39%, so it is equal with the top income tax rate, and that is aimed at stopping people setting up trusts and taking in their income via a trust to try and avoid that top tax rate. That's expected to net them about $1 billion over 3 years, so about $335 million a year. In the little surprise announcements, Te Matatini finally has a massive funding increase. That's get $34 million over 2 years, so it's now on slightly more than the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. So that's a little win for the Māori caucus. And on infrastructure, there is a massive $70 billion spending over the next few years on infrastructure, and they've set up a special resilience infrastructure fund separate to that, which has an initial $6 billion in, which is aimed at improving after the flooding and Cyclone Gabriel, repairing all that infrastructure, telecommunications, the electricity infrastructure and the roads. The initial target of that will be that, and then they will roll it out kind of everywhere to try and improve the resilience of infrastructure worldwide. As for the rest, the butter was spread very, very thinly over a very, very big piece of bread. So there's small increases in a lot of places, nothing outstanding, nothing that delivers to all voters, and no extra for the kinds like superannuitants and beneficiaries. If they're looking for much, they pretty much got what they were going to get earlier in the year. Grant Robertson pointed very much to the unexpected cost of Cyclone Gabriel as a factor in it, adding a significant $9 to $14 billion worth to what the government has to foot of that, and the need to get inflation back down as a reason not to splash up large, even in an election year. So the budget was aimed very much at those factors, and that is it in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Claire. Well, we hear that Finance Minister Grant Robertson is currently handing out that budget in the House. So thanks, Claire. I know we're going to come back to you later because we do have you chatting to some political leaders too. But for now, let's go to Grant Robertson as he hands out what is his 6th budget. He said that this has been one of his toughest budgets to deliver yet. There are 4 themes of it, which Claire mentioned there. Cost of living and targeted relief, certainly one there too. Delivery of core services was top of mind for Grant Robertson with this one as well. The recovery and resilience following Cyclone Gabrielle and the Auckland and North Island floods that threw a real spanner in the works for this government. Also fiscal sustainability. So no doubt we will also hear him talk about what the Crown's debt position looks like and also what this might do to inflation. You heard from Claire there that he is certainly concerned about that, and that is something that the opposition could jump on as well. We also understand that he is wearing a tie gifted to him from the current Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, as is Budget Day special, they typically do. It is actually an old tie from Michael Cullen, who was a former Labour Finance Minister who sadly passed away in 2021 of cancer. Lovely guy, and we hear that Grant Robertson is very proud and honoured to be wearing that today.
Appropriation 2023-24 Estimates Bill introduction.
Here he goes, Grant Robertson.
The Appropriation 2023-24 Estimates Bill is set down for first reading immediately.
Speaker.
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I move that the Appropriation 2023-24 Estimates Bill be now read a first time.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. A party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand Labour.
62 votes in favour.
New Zealand National.
34 votes opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
10 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand.
9 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
Votes in favour.
Dr Elizabeth Kirikiri.
1 vote in favour.
Honourable Mika Whaitini.
1 vote in favour.
The ayes are 75, the noes are 44. The bill will be read a first time.
Appropriations 2023-24 Estimates Bill, first reading.
The Appropriations 2023-24 Estimates Bill is set down for second reading immediately.
Mr.
The
Speaker,
Honourable Grant Robertson.
I move that the Appropriation 2023-24 Estimates Bill be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, just before I begin my formal budget speech, as the Member of Parliament for Wellington Central, I want to make a specific acknowledgement of the victims of the Loafers Lodge fire and all those who have been affected by it. I'm sure I can speak on behalf of the House in saying our araha and thoughts are with all of those who have been affected. Mr. Speaker, it is my privilege to present New Zealand's 5th wellbeing budget. As in each of these budgets, we have taken into account the wellbeing of our people, the strength of our communities, the health of our environment, alongside the performance of our economy and finances. In doing so, we are striking a balance between supporting our people now with the pressure of cost of living and investing in future jobs and economic security. The backdrop to Budget 2023 is challenging. It is hard to remember a time in New Zealand's history where there have been so many challenges to our economic, environmental and social systems in such a short period of time. Individuals, families, businesses and communities are feeling the impact of global economic and political turbulence, high inflation, the lingering hangover of the COVID emergency and the impacts of climate change through more frequent and intense weather events. Cost of living pressures are being felt across our communities. Budget 2023 responds to those pressures in a targeted and responsible way, building on what we have done over recent years and in a way that will not exacerbate inflation. There is a particular focus on parents and young families, including the expansion of 20 hours ECE support to 2-year-olds. Free public transport for children and half price for under 25s and the scrapping of the $5 prescription charge for all New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, we are also making a significant commitment to support the recovery and rebuild of those regions affected by severe weather events earlier in the year. This was an unwelcome and unplanned for series of events, but our careful financial management and the reprioritisation program led by the Prime Minister has allowed us to reallocate resources and meet the government's future contributions through the budget allowances. We are on track to return to surplus within the forecast period. Our net debt will peak at 22% of GDP, well below the ceiling set in our fiscal rules. And inflation is forecast to return to around 3% by the end of 2024. Budget 2023 also looks ahead. We are very much focused on doing the basics well, with significant investment in education, health and housing. These areas are the bedrock of opportunity for each and every New Zealander. At the same time, we are improving the resilience of New Zealand's critical infrastructure and investing in a more productive, higher wage, lower emissions economy, including through research and technology. The budget strikes the critical balance between the support required today and the investment needs of the future. We have carefully cut our cloth as the emergency spending in response to COVID activities declines and we move to a more fiscally sustainable path. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand has withstood many shocks in recent memory and our well-being has generally held up well. However, absorbing these shocks has affected our wealth and we need to rebuild our resilience to the future challenges we know will come. The Treasury's first wellbeing report, Te Tai Waiora, provided a broad perspective on the range of things that matter for wellbeing. It highlighted that New Zealand is a good place to live in many ways and that many aspects of our life have improved over the past 20 years. We enjoy cleaner air, longer life expectancy and higher incomes. However, New Zealand faces wellbeing challenges, particularly around mental wellbeing, education and housing quality and affordability. And these challenges are on average felt more strongly by our younger people. These issues are long-standing and they have not lost their urgency and they continue to be reflected in our wellbeing objectives. We are in a good position to meet these challenges. The New Zealand economy emerged from COVID-19 well, with modest growth anticipated over 2023. Our economic recovery from COVID is in the top 10 of OECD nations. At 3.4%, the Household Labour Force Survey measure of unemployment is currently equal or lower than any period prior to 2020. New Zealand continues to have some of the lowest public debt in the world, and Budget 2023 is another step in the direction of bringing core Crown expenses as a percentage of GDP back towards pre-pandemic levels. We remain committed to returning the Obergau to surplus within the forecast period and keeping net debt below the ceiling of 30% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, in the context of our wellbeing approach, the government remains committed to improving child wellbeing. The latest figures released by Stats New Zealand show that 8 out of 9 of the child poverty measures have seen a significant reduction since the baseline year of 2018. Over the last 2 years, child poverty rates on the measures we have comparable data for are the lowest they have been since we started measuring, and rates have almost halved on 2 of them. This is a testament to the comprehensive package of investments that we have put in place to support families over several years and are continuing to do so in Budget 2023. Mr. Speaker, it is worth noting our wellbeing budget approach applies a gender budgeting lens into Budget 2023, expanding on last year's pilot program. This year it looked at 27 initiatives across 15 agencies. And this lens has influenced the range of investments, including in the cost of living space, and has been an important and useful indicator of whether the budget is meeting our wellbeing objectives. For example, we know that on average, women have lower KiwiSaver balances and retirement income than men. Time out of the workforce for parenting responsibilities is one key reason for this. The government is addressing this through Budget 2023. Settle down, Mr. Bishop. The government is addressing this through Budget 2023 by introducing a matching employer contribution to paid parental leave recipients. Mr. Speaker, this recognises the unpaid nature of childcare and supports savings for retirement. It is a small but significant boost to lifetime income for many women. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 builds on the support we have been providing to New Zealanders in the face of cost of living pressures. The global inflation crisis, which has seen prices rise faster and stay higher for longer, is causing strain for many people, particularly for low and middle income households and those with young children. The government has already delivered significant support through the cost of living payment, reductions to fuel excise duty and road user charges, and half-price public transport. In addition, since 1 April, more than 1.4 million New Zealanders have benefited from increased assistance to help with the cost of living, including people receiving a main benefit, students and superannuitants. This includes 354,000 low-income New Zealanders who we've supported through a $311 million investment from this budget to support main benefits to increase by 7.2% in line with inflation. Budget 2023 focuses on targeted cost of living support that will not exacerbate inflation pressures, while also laying the foundation for long-term benefits, including educational and health outcomes and meeting our climate change goals. Mr. Speaker, we know that the first 5 years of a child's life are extremely important for development and learning. We also know that right now the cost of access to early childhood education and childcare can be a barrier for parents and caregivers wanting to enter or remain in employment, education or training. Parents should not have to forego ECE for their children because of the cost. Budget 2023 responds to this by investing $1.8 billion in early childhood education. Mr. Speaker, the flagship of this package is extending the 20 hours support to include 2-year-olds, adding to the existing 3 to 5-year-olds. Based on average costs in 2023, families who were not previously receiving childcare subsidies would save an estimated $133.20 per week if their child attends ECE for at least 20 hours a week. Alongside this, we are providing further support for pay parity for ECE teachers, giving an average 5.3% funding increase for ECE providers and providing a sustainability grant for Play Centre Aotearoa. We are also expanding eligibility criteria for flexible childcare assistance for low to middle income working families, extending the duration period and indexing the rates of flexible childcare assistance to the CPI, which will support parents with informal care costs when formal care is not available. Altogether, this package means we will relieve the pressure of an essential cost while also ensuring that those who provide it are adequately funded to meet increases in demand and pay for those who work in the sector appropriately. It is a substantial investment in our children, in our parents, in our teachers and caregivers, and ultimately in New Zealand's future. In addition to these investments in our education system, Budget 2023 extends the Ngātini Whetū pilot run under the whānau ora umbrella. This focuses on ensuring that Pepe and Tamariki are supported specifically in their first 1,000 days alongside broader whānau aspirations. Mr. Speaker, for some New Zealanders, prescription costs are a barrier to receiving the health care they need and lead to trade-offs with the purchase of other necessities. We know that in the 2021-22 financial year, 135,000 people did not collect their prescription because of the cost. I am pleased to say that from the 1st of July this year, we are removing the $5 prescription co-payment for all New Zealanders. This will reduce inequality in our health system and lead to better health outcomes for everyone. We are also extending the Ka Ora Ka Ako Healthy School Lunch program. Rising inflation on household incomes puts pressure on food security for families in whānau, and we know that learning is affected if children are hungry. Through Budget 2023, $325 million has been invested to continue this program until the end of 2024. For families with 2 children, it is estimated the scheme saves on average $60 per week. Mr. Speaker, access to affordable transport is a cost pressure for many New Zealanders. The government has previously created the Community Connect public transport concession that provides half-price public transport to community service card holders. Today, I can announce that this has been extended to all under 25-year-olds and users of total mobility services. I know that this commitment will be particularly welcomed by tertiary students who are often reliant on public transport. Mr. Speaker, the government has decided to go further in order to support families. Budget 2023 will fund free public transport for children aged 5 to 12 years. Mr. Speaker, This investment of $327.4 million will help passengers meet the costs of public transport, encourage increased use, and also support New Zealand to achieve its climate change goals. It is another example of where we can both relieve the cost of living pressures for some families and contribute to our emissions reductions. We can also do this through household energy bills. A warm, dry home is key to improved health and wellbeing outcomes for New Zealanders. Homes that lack adequate insulation and efficient heating lead to higher energy bills and poor health outcomes. That's why Budget 2023 is funding the extension and expansion of the Warmer Kiwi Homes program. This will see a further 100,000 insulation and heating installations, as well as the installation of efficient hot water heaters and LED lights. Warmer Kiwi Homes is estimated to have reduced electricity use by 16% on average over the winter months, as well as cutting the risk of respiratory illness and making homes drier and more comfortable. It is a true wellbeing policy. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 funds the critical services that New Zealanders rely on day to day, including health, education, welfare and housing. It is vital that we continue to deliver these basic services well, and there are major challenges to doing so in a high inflation environment. Funding these services must come first in a constrained spending environment. We're investing significantly to maintain and enhance public services, and this includes the public sector pay adjustment to settle a large number of pay claims across the core public service. Education is critical to the success of New Zealand now and in the future. The Budget 2023 package provides $3.6 billion operating and $1.3 billion capital towards education, including tertiary education. As well as our flagship ECE package, there are a number of other key education investments. A cornerstone is investing in a fit-for-purpose school property portfolio that reflects the ongoing needs of students and teachers. In Budget 2023, the Government is providing an additional 6,000 student places to the school network and 4 new schools. This is in addition to $147 million to modify school buildings with automatic doors, lifts and bathroom refits to support the needs of students. We're also investing significant new funding to the ongoing Christchurch Schools Rebuild program and to deliver property improvements to 175 more small, isolated schools across New Zealand. $21.9 million operating and $112.5 million capital will be invested to expand Māori medium education infrastructure across Kura, which will support the Government's objectives of 30% ākonga Māori learning in these environments by 2040. Mr. Speaker, the higher costs facing our education system has been recognised through an increase of $233.9 million for schools operational grants and a $521 million increase for tertiary tuition and training subsidies. That increase is the biggest for 20 years. Mr. Speaker, these are on top of the $260 million for ECE providers mentioned earlier. The overall investment of $1 billion will help ensure education providers are resourced to deliver quality educational outcomes across the entire system. Among other education initiatives, a highlight is the further extension of the Apprenticeship Boost program through to 31 December 2024. This program was introduced during COVID to ensure there are skilled workers for key industries and that apprentices do not miss out on completing their qualification. This new investment is estimated to allow 30,000 apprentices to start or continue to receive support. Mr. Speaker, we recognise the importance of work done to support the vulnerable in our community. The Community Connectors program provided an important service to help individuals, families and whānau navigate and access government support throughout COVID-19. Given its success, we are funding 100 Community Connectors for a further 2 years. We also know that regions affected by the recent weather events are in particular need of support. So we are providing funding for an additional 65 Community Connectors to be based in these regions. Mr. Speaker, through Budget 2023, we are delivering on our manifesto commitment to permanently reinstate the training incentive allowance to support sole parents, disabled people and their carers to study. Disabled people will benefit from Budget 2023 with an additional $864 million provided to Whaikaha, the Ministry for Disabled People, to fund increasing demand and inflationary pressures for disability support services. We are also working to end the discriminatory minimum wage exemption for around 800 disabled employees in New Zealand by mid-2025. This means they will no longer be paid less than the minimum wage for their work. Budget 2023 will continue funding to deliver financial advice and debt services across New Zealand for those who are struggling financially. Funding of $29.2 million will help providers meet demand for one-to-one services and peer-led support for people with complex needs. We are also providing further funding for the Food Secure Communities initiative to support food rescue and food security, including in cyclone-affected regions. Mr. Speaker, the government is undertaking a significant reform of the health system. To back this up, last budget we moved to a multi-year funding approach to plan better and ensure more consistent health services. Relying on the annual budget cycle for funding made it difficult to address long-term challenges in the health system. Budget 2022 provided the largest health investment ever, with $11.1 billion in new funding to put our healthcare on a sustainable financial footing, including a $1.3 billion increase for the 2023-24 year to help address historic and future cost pressures. 1 year on from the establishment of Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand and Te Aka Whai Ora, we are focused on supporting and growing the health workforce, increasing capacity in health care and expanding GP services. The investment we have made means over $1 billion has been spent on increasing wages and staff numbers this financial year, including $63 million for safe staffing levels that will allow for an additional 500 new nurses. As the Minister of Health has previously indicated, she is prioritising resources to frontline services where they are needed, such as nearly $100 million towards initiatives to deal with the winter peak, $118 million to reduce waiting lists, and $20 million to improve immunisation programs and screening coverage for Māori and Pacific peoples. These are just a few of the programs of Te Whatu Ora and Te Aka Whai Ora. From 2024, we intend to move health budgets to a 3-year funding cycle to align with the New Zealand health plans. Mr. Speaker, last budget we instituted an integrated and long-term funding approach for our work in the justice and law and order area. Based on an agreed cross-agency plan, agencies have the certainty of a 3-year pool of funding and the flexibility to move resources around to meet emerging needs. This approach is already proving successful, with a fast-tracking of an early intervention program targeting recidivist young offenders in Hamilton, Auckland and Christchurch. Less than 30% of those in the program have been referred again after the intervention. Part of the long-term funding is a commitment to keep police resources in line with the population. In addition to achieving the government's goal of 1,800 extra police, there are resources available to keep the ratio of 1 officer to every 480 people. This is a significant improvement on the ratio of 1 officer to every 544 people that we inherited in 2017. Mr. Speaker, in line with our wellbeing objectives, this budget continues to support Māori and Pacific economic, social and environmental aspirations. A critical focus is in housing. In Budget 2023, the government is making sizable investments in key infrastructure, such as an extra $23 million for the Te Ringa Hapai Whenua Fund to further invest in infrastructure on Whenua Māori, and $200 million to increase the supply of Māori housing and to repair properties. In addition, targeted funding is provided for repairs to whānau-owned homes in cyclone-affected areas. We are continuing to foster the growth of Māori and Pacific languages, culture and identity. To deliver the Pacific Languages Strategy, we will improve access to Pacific language learning resources with a $13 million commitment and add to our already significant Te Reo Māori revitalisation with a $10 million boost. Key Māori cultural institutions will receive investments to maintain and grow their impact. This includes Te Matatini, who will receive $34 million over the next 2 years. We are also providing a further $18 million to support recognition and community involvement in the Matariki public holiday. Our investments in education and whānau illustrate our commitment to laying the strongest foundations for our tamariki and supporting households experiencing cost of living pressures. To strengthen Māori education, we are boosting teacher supply, in addition to investing significantly in the infrastructure of Māori medium schools, as I mentioned earlier. To ensure families continue to receive the support they need, Budget 2023 increases investment in whānau ora and further expands its services in addition to the funding for Ngātini Whetū. We know that Pacific peoples are more likely than other New Zealanders to experience unemployment or low employment, and that is why Budget 2023 is investing almost $13 million to implement the Pacific Employment Action Plan. This will bring Pacific workers into new employment and training opportunities and deliver the Pacific Wellbeing Strategy, which will fund initiatives that grow the capability of the workforce. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic and recent extreme weather events earlier this year show just how important it is to improve our resilience as a country. Severe weather in the North Island at the start of the year caused widespread disruption and damage to people's lives and properties, the scale of which will be felt for some time. In the immediate aftermath of the events, we made urgent investments to support the response, including direct financial support to businesses and growers, repairing damaged infrastructure, and providing temporary housing and other assistance to affected families. In advance of the budget, more than $800 million had been allocated to this emergency response work. We are building on our immediate response by investing a total of $941 million of operating and $195 million of capital expenditure in Budget 2023 to support the recovery and invest in regional resilience. This package will help local government improve flood protection, invest a further $475 million to rebuild our railways, state highways, bridges and local roads, repair damaged schools, rebuild damaged whānau homes and ensure the provision of temporary accommodation for dislocated families. The package also invests in the provision of health and mental wellbeing services, including the extension of mana ake. This package also maintains our support for those people made vulnerable by these events. This includes $11 million to top up community support funds and reduce food insecurity, funding to help businesses retain staff and displaced workers to find new employment, and help connect individuals in whānau to the support that they need. Budget 2023 also continues our support for the recovery of the primary sector and rural communities, with an additional $30 million committed to address time-sensitive health and safety and animal welfare challenges. This is all part of the rolling maul of support for weather-affected regions. There's further work underway on regional and sectoral strategies and on support for severely affected properties. We are committed to a regionally led recovery where local voices are central to government decisions. We are supporting regional recovery structures to coordinate recovery, as well as the Cyclone Gabrielle Recovery Task Force and local public service coordination for each affected region. Mr. Speaker, while we are focused on supporting families with the immediate pressures and protecting our vital services, we also need to deliver on our plan to build a high-wage, low-emissions economy to ensure security for all New Zealanders. Budget 2023 investments are the building blocks for addressing New Zealand's long-standing challenges, and they lay the groundwork for taking advantage of opportunities to build a sustainable, globally competitive economy. Mr. Speaker, the government has taken significant steps to address New Zealand's infrastructure deficit. We have committed $71 billion of infrastructure investment over the next 5 years, in addition to the $45 billion we have spent on infrastructure in the past 5 years. This is the funding that builds our schools, our hospitals, public housing, rail and road networks. In the last term of government, we set up the Infrastructure Commission Te Waihanga, which developed the New Zealand Infrastructure Strategy, identifying the challenges New Zealand is facing over the next 30 years. We know we need to change how we think about infrastructure planning and resourcing. Alongside this budget, we have released our Infrastructure Action Plan, which supports our response to the strategy and which is crucial to continuing to deliver the infrastructure transformation required while providing certainty to the construction sector. As the plan lays out, we need to future-proof our infrastructure for New Zealand's growing and changing population, climate change events, and to make use of developing technology available to us. The North Island weather events added a level of urgency to our infrastructure investment and planning and highlighted the importance of resilience in the face of climate change and increasing extreme weather events. Today, I am announcing a major change in how we address our infrastructure deficit and build a more resilient nation. Through Budget 2023, we are investing $6 billion in the initial phase of a National Resilience Plan. This will support medium and long-term infrastructure investment and focus in the first instance on building back better from the recent weather events. The initial focus of investments will likely be on road, rail and local resilience, as well as telecommunications and electricity investment. As indicated at Budget 2022, the change to the fiscal rules means we can use our balance sheet more effectively to support long-term productive investments such as this program. For too long, governments have kicked the can down the road when it comes to investing in resilient and essential infrastructure investment. Today, we embark on the long-term nation building that I believe a responsible government must do. Mr Speaker, we continue to invest significant resources into public housing through Kāinga Ora and community housing providers. I am proud to say that Budget 2023 provides funding to deliver an additional 3,000 new public homes by June 2025. The turnaround in the building of public housing is one of the signature achievements of our Labour government. So far, we have delivered 11,830 more public homes and 4,131 transitional homes. There are close to 4,500 public housing places currently under construction. Budget 2023 also covers the increased costs caused by inflation for finishing that work. New Zealand's national rail network is critical for passenger transportation and freight services. In Budget 2023, we are providing $369.2 million to continue to develop a resilient and reliable national rail service. To address cost increases, the government is investing $9.4 million operating and $197 million capital in the Auckland City Rail Link project to provide a key link within Auckland's public transport network. Mr Speaker, Budget 2023 includes significant investments in research and development to deliver on the future pathways reforms of our public research system. This is consistent with our commitment to increase research and development expenditure to 2% of GDP. The centrepiece of this investment is the establishment of 3 new multi-institution research hubs focused on health and wellbeing, oceans, climate and hazards, and advanced manufacturing, biotech and energy. This $451 million investment will drive innovation, collaboration and export earning potential. It is an exciting development bringing public and private sector together to solve significant problems and foster growth of our science sector. Backing this up is investment in research fellowships and an applied doctoral training scheme for more than 260 people to fill skill gaps and grow a sustainable research system. Budget 2023 continues our investment in industries that will drive us towards a high-wage, low-emissions economy. We will invest a further $74.7 million in our industry transformation plans. This includes $30 million for the horticulture technology sector, which we will assist to develop more productive ways of operating, including for those affected by the cyclone. The budget also provides new investment in the digital and tourism transformation plans. Mr Speaker, the game development sector is a growing part of our economy. In 2022, it contributed $400 million to GDP and is the source of high-value jobs that are driving export returns. The sector is an internationally competitive one, and we are at risk of losing our talent overseas. Budget 2023 includes $160 million to establish a 20% rebate for video game developers, which will help grow and protect New Zealand's domestic game development sector. Individual game developers will be able to access up to $3 million as part of the scheme. Mr Speaker, in Budget 2022, the government established the Climate Emergency Response Fund as a permanent feature of the annual budget process. The SURF supports New Zealand's climate change objectives by providing dedicated funding to initiatives that support the transition to a low emissions and climate resilient economy. In Budget 2023, there is a $1.9 billion SURF package to further reduce emissions and enhance our resilience to climate change. As already noted, we are expanding the Warmer Kiwi Homes program and reducing the cost of public transport for hundreds of thousands of Kiwis. In addition, we are expanding our electric vehicle infrastructure. That's right. In many areas of New Zealand, especially in rural communities, there is not the charging infrastructure to support the exceptional growth in the number of EVs. Budget 2023 will begin the rollout of our EV charging strategy, which will see charging hubs every 150 to 200 kilometres on main highways and public charging at community facilities for all settlements of more than 2,000 people. Mr Speaker, funding is also being made available to support the purchase of low-emission heavy vehicles like trucks and buses to build on the success of the Clean Car Discount and the Low Emissions Transport Fund. It is estimated that this will see 500 low-emission heavy vehicles on the road, saving operators fuel costs by up to 75%. The SURF is also supporting the $300 million capital injection to the New Zealand Green Investment Fund, a renewable energy system for the Chatham Islands, and funding for community-scale renewable energy generation and storage. The size and makeup of the Budget 2023 SURF package reflects the scale and breadth of the challenge ahead of us, while prioritising resources to where they can have the greatest impact. Mr Speaker, putting Budget 2023 together has required challenging trade-offs and decisions. Along with the investments we need to make to help reduce the pressure of the cost of living, delivering public services and our resilience and recovery, we also have to move to a more sustainable fiscal position. The last few budgets have supported our response to and our recovery from the impact of COVID. This has necessitated significant spending, which is now reducing. The forecasts in this budget see core Crown spending as a percentage of GDP, tracking back to just above the long-term average at 31.5%, by the end of the forecast period. We need to move carefully in reducing spending so we don't undermine the investments we have made, but this direction of travel is important for the long-term prosperity of New Zealand. Persistent inflation has meant that the costs of delivering government services have increased, and it has been necessary to slightly increase the operating allowances set at the budget policy statement for this year and in out years in order to meet these costs, including the cyclone and flood recovery, rather than cut essential services. The Treasury is forecasting inflation will decline across the next few years to 3.3% in 2024 and 2.6% in 2025. Even with the investments that we have made, New Zealand continues to have some of the lowest public debt in the world. New Zealand's net debt is forecast to peak at 22% of GDP next year, before reducing to 18.4% at the end of the forecast period. This compares well, using IMF measures, with the likes of Australia at 36%, the United Kingdom at 95%, and the United States at 96%. Mr Speaker, anchored by the fiscal rules that we set at Budget 2022, we are on track to return the Obergau to surplus within the forecast period, although 1 year later than was forecast at the half-year update. The cost of responding to the cyclone and more persistent inflation are the cause of this, but it is worth bearing in mind that this will be the same length of time that the previous government took to return to surplus after the global financial crisis. Average deficits as a share of GDP remain lower than in the wake of the GFC. Our prudent fiscal strategy of running surpluses and reducing net debt before COVID meant that we had a stronger starting position than other countries. It meant we could use our balance sheet to protect lives and livelihoods during the pandemic. This has helped prevent a deep and long-lasting recession, and Treasury is in fact forecasting that the economy will not now go into recession. New Zealand's fiscal position remains strong, and the fiscal forecast stronger than expected, even in the face of increasing costs of delivering core government services and the recent weather disasters. Mr Speaker, in total $4 billion in savings and reprioritisations have been achieved to offset new spending this budget. We will approach future budgets with the same restraint to ensure a sure footing for our public finances for generations to come. As they were at this budget, ministers will be required to identify opportunities for the reprioritisation of resources and improvement of efficiencies within baselines before seeking new funding. Finding opportunities to cut back spending and to redirect funding from one activity to another helps us ensure that funding is directed to the highest value activities and that the government is focused on the issues most important to New Zealanders. Significant reprioritisation of funding has been achieved for Budget 2023, including $280 million from reducing funding no longer required for fees-free tertiary education, $385.8 million from the COVID health tagged contingency, while still leaving enough support for our COVID response this winter. Alongside Budget 2023, the government has refreshed its priorities to focus on the issues that are most important to New Zealanders. This also yielded significant savings, which we have used to offset new spending at Budget 2023. This includes $364 million from stopping the TVNZ-RNZ merger, $585.1 million from stopping the Clean Car Upgrade and social leasing trial, and $500 million from the refocused water services reform. Budget 2023 also includes tax changes that improve the integrity of our tax system by bringing the trustee tax rate in line with the top personal rate. This change will help ensure that the top marginal tax rate applies more comprehensively to individuals with income over $180,000. This approach was recommended by officials when the top income tax rate was increased. Ministers undertook to monitor the situation, and we are now acting. It is interesting to note that just 5% of trusts accounted for 78% of the income in the 2021 tax year. This change addresses a potential loophole while also making sure there is more equity in our tax system. Our total savings and revenue changes have allowed us to keep core government services running in a high inflation environment, support New Zealanders with the rising cost of living, and respond to the recent North Island weather disasters, all while ensuring we keep net debt well below its ceiling of 30% of GDP and that we are on track to deliver an operating surplus by 25-26. That, Mr Speaker, is a balanced fiscal strategy. Mr Speaker, Budget 2023 comes at a time of considerable pressure on households, businesses and amid international uncertainty, persistent high inflation and global supply chain issues. It is a budget that does exactly what it says on the tin: support for today and building for tomorrow. We know many New Zealanders are doing it tough right now, and we are here to support them as we have done over recent years. Doing the basics well, including providing strong investment in the services that New Zealanders rely on, has to be the priority right now. There are many things the government might like to do, or tax cuts that other parties might decide to promise. But for me, keeping our children safe, warm and dry at school has to come first. Building 3,000 more state housing places has to come first. Funding our health system for 500 more nurses has to come first. Having more police on the front line has to come first. Support for people with disabilities, older New Zealanders and the vulnerable has to come first. Mr Speaker, these investments don't happen by chance, and they are ultimately at risk if there is not a government determined that they will be there. They happen because a government prioritises them and because we know they matter to our people. We also know that even in tough times, it is vital that we look to a better tomorrow. Our investments in our people, our businesses, our communities and our environment will guide us to that place. We are making investments in this budget that will build our nation for the future. Mr Speaker, we are a resilient and innovative country and one where opportunities abound. Once again, through Budget 2023, this Labour government is ensuring that each and every New Zealander can seize those opportunities and achieve their potential. Kia kaha, kia maia, kia manawanui. I commend the Wellbeing Budget 2023 to the House.
All right, well, well, let's recap all of this year's budget's big announcements, the big spending, starting with health. They're removing $5 co-payment for all prescriptions. The cost of that will be $618 million over 4 years. There's also more money to help reducing wait lists. That will cost $118 million and $100 million to boost primary care. There's $63 million for 500 extra nurses and $75 million more for Pharmac. For parents, this is a big one. 2-year-olds are now included in 20 hours of free early childhood education from March 2024. That is at a big cost of $1.2 billion over 4 years. That saves eligible parents about $133 a week. Subsidies for childcare centres rise by 5.3%, costing $260 million over 4 years. Post-cyclone infrastructure, also a big one. Telecommunications, power and roads, that will be a $6 billion spend. This is called a National Resilience Plan, set up with initial funding of that $6 billion. The first priority, though, is repair and rebuild of telco, energy and roading after Auckland flooding and the cyclone Gabrielle. Public transport, $327 million here for free public transport for primary school aged children. Half-price public transport for under 25s from the 1st of July. That will benefit about 774,000 people, and there are also going to be pay rises for bus drivers. All right, housing next. $403 million to expand the scheme for heating and insulation installations to 100,000 more homes. Also 3,000 new public housing places. Onto the economy. Inflation is forecast to drop to 3% by next September. Treasury is no longer forecasting a recession. You heard applause for that in the House this afternoon. That's due to the cyclone recovery that will stimulate the economy. Unemployment is forecast to peak at 5.3% in late 2024, and GDP is forecast at 3.2% this year, dropping to 1% next year. All right, looking at our fiscal position, the books. We will return to surplus in 2025 to 2026. That is delayed by 1 year. Net debt is forecast to peak at 22% in 2024. It's currently sitting at 19%. On Treasury's numbers, it will eventually drop back down to 18% of GDP as well. Just looking at the surprises, because there's always some of these in any budget, there will be a $34 million increase in funding for Te Matatini over 2 years, up from $3 million a year right now. The festival will get more funding than the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra for the first time. There will also be a new 20% rebate for game development studios, allowing them to claim up to $3 million a year in rebates. That's been quite a controversial one for the tech industry. Well, Liam, we were told that this would be a no-frills budget. How frilly is it, do you think?
I think there's a few more frills there than there might have been, but it's not, look, there's nothing huge and epic there in scale. There's a little bit more spending targeted at kids, at young people, people with families who are struggling. I think what it is, it's interesting to see the Labour government make a call about the kind of government they're going to be going into this election. They had a choice to sort of work with the Reserve Bank to beat inflation fast, you know, the fiscally austere and work with the Reserve Bank's hikes to try and get on top of inflation and have us through out the other side. That's not kind of happening. Instead, they've sort of taken a don't panic approach. We can live with a slower decline. It is happening. The upside is we don't have the recession. We don't have unemployment going as high. So I guess they look at the polls and they think we can roll through this election. The direction of travel will be okay. We won't be rebalancing the economy as fast, and that is a concern if something else comes along and hits us out of the blue. But it is, it's an interesting one in terms of it's Labour still being a Labour government, not sort of adjusting the sort of central philosophy because we need to sort of get inflation under control fast.
While still staying under that 30% debt ceiling that they've set for themselves too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Liam. We are going to go now to the opposition leader, National Party leader Chris Luxon, who's speaking in the House, giving his counter-argument.
This time I'll get better, this time I'll do better. But every time he blows it out. And that's because he's addicted to spending, and he's an addict, and as a result, he doesn't want to admit that he's got a problem. And the sad thing is that the new Prime Minister, his new boss, isn't tough enough to tell him, hey, Sunshine, we need to make an intervention here to actually get it sorted, get it back on track. So, Mr. Speaker, it is very, very simple. The New Zealand people cannot afford another 3 years of this Labor government. So, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the economy, because the forecasts in this budget make for incredibly grim reading. And the books show us that there is more economic pain on the way, and that is thanks to this government with no economic plan. Inflation is high, and the government spending is going to make it worse. Interest rates, by their own admission, are going to be there for longer and stay higher for longer because of Grant Robertson and Chris Hipkins' reckless addiction to spending. And that will smash every single Kiwi with a mortgage up and down this country, and they're going to feel that pain. And the other thing that was obvious in the books is that unemployment is set to climb higher, and it's higher thanks to this government's economic mismanagement. Now, I want to be really clear. I want to explain to all New Zealanders, actually, how did we get here? How have Chris Hipkins and Grant Robertson so badly mismanaged this economy and got us into this mess? And this is how it starts. It starts with record levels of government spending. In fact, New Zealand was the second highest in the developed world on government spending. And then they took and coupled that with extraordinary monetary policy. We were the 5th highest country in the world printing cash. And then, just for good measure, they restricted immigration and shut the joint down and actually created domestic inflation. And so what happened was New Zealand got flooded with money, it popped asset prices, and it embedded domestic inflation. And that high inflation now means that we have to deal with high interest rates. It means that we deal with a shrinking economy and slowing growth for longer. That's what's happening here. That's the pattern of economic history. Those are the lessons of economics that are well known. But, Mr. Speaker, I have to say, up and down this country, I visit it, go everywhere every week, and I see New Zealanders that are doing it incredibly tough. And they can gaslight as much as they want and say everything's going to be fine and it's all well managed. It's not. Because I've sat across the table from families that are in budgeting services, and they are under immense stress and anxiety within that family, trying to work out how they reconcile their own budget to pay for a big jump up in their mortgage costs. And I've talked to Kiwis who've had to sit down with their kids and stop the music lessons and stop the swimming lessons because they can't afford it anymore, because they've got to meet those mortgage repayments. And I've actually gone and sat and talked with Kiwis who actually walk the supermarket aisles looking for what they can buy, the basics that they want to be able to buy with the fixed budgets that they have and they can't, and so they go off to a food bank because that's the only place they can get some support. Well, I want to say to all those Kiwis, you've got two people to blame on this. You've got to blame Chris Hipkins and you've got to blame Grant Robertson for creating that pain and suffering for you. And I want to tell you, it doesn't have to be like this. It didn't need to be like this. This budget needed to deliver a plan for New Zealanders to grow the economy, and it didn't. This budget needed to deliver a plan to deal with the underlying drivers of inflation and not just more band-aids, but it didn't. And because we know that a strong economy is the way in which we get to lift incomes, it's how we get to deal with the cost of living, and it's how we get to afford the public services we so desperately deserve. That's why we care about this stuff. That's why we care about good, strong economic management, because that's what it enables us to do for this country. And all we get is Labor's plans to spend billions of dollars more in an inflationary bonfire. So let me be clear, Labor has blown the budget, they have blown the books, and we are going to be suffering with more pain. So, Mr. Speaker, let's talk a little bit about spending, because as I said, it actually locks in even more, the addiction to spending is even more intense than it's ever been before. And I have to say, I thought it was quite outrageous, quite incredible that this week our Prime Minister couldn't front up and actually explain how much his government is spending. Didn't know, and frankly didn't think it was probably that important. And I reckon all of that is just massive disrespect to taxpayers. Massively disrespectful, because he doesn't care, doesn't understand the numbers, and he just thinks it's his money, he just keep taking it and actually treating them like a bottomless ATM machine. And so let's work through those numbers, because we now have debt set to climb to $95 billion. You know? And do you know what the interest bill on that is each day? $22 million. $22 million that we don't get to spend on something else. We've got government spending ballooning out to $137 billion. How much do you reckon that costs each Kiwi family? $23,000. $23,000 more each year because of government spending. $61 billion more in spending and absolutely nothing to show for it. And what have we seen from this government? We've just got a culture of excuses, and we've got a culture of addiction to spending. 1.8 billion on consultants. Yet Chris Hipkins told them don't spend on consultants, but they kept doing it anyway. $200 million on a failed polytechnic merger. 80% of the staff want to leave. 10% less enrolments, and looking for more money with more deficits. $100 million on government advertising. $500 million for very big companies on climate subsidies. Almost $500 million on a health bureaucracy that should be going to the front line. $50 million on that bike bridge. That was special, wasn't it? Wasn't that just special? The bike bridge was very special. $16 million got spent by Willie on the RNZ TVNZ merger, and we all know how that ended. And we've got 200 comms staff now at Health New Zealand and more at the ministry. Frankly, I'd sooner have more nurses. I'd sooner have 200 nurses, not 200 comms staff. And we've got a 10-fold increase of comms staff at Michael Wood's NZTA. And then we've got the beauty, the $30 billion on light rail that just keeps sitting out there, coming one day. So let's be clear, they have blown the budget. Grant Robertson spent billions of dollars. He's blown out the books. We've got massive deficits. We've got years of deficits ahead of us based off this. He's blown out the credit card, and debt is spiralling up to $95 billion. And I have to say, Chris Hipkins doesn't get it. After 6 years in government, he doesn't get that every dollar the government spends has to be earned by someone. It has to be earned by a Kiwi who's building a business in very tough conditions at the moment. It has to be earned by a Kiwi who's working hour after hour after hour just to put food on the table. And it has to be earned by Kiwis who get up and go to work, who get the kids to school, who make the school lunches and actually want to get ahead. And they pay the taxes, and he spends it and he wastes it. But rather than confront their own addiction to spending, what do? They look to blame others. And so they blame COVID. They blame COVID. And this year they're going to be spending tens of billions of dollars more than we had during the COVID period. Unbelievable. Quite unbelievable. And they make any excuse to avoid actually facing up to their addiction. Now, we heard a little bit of trying to be financially responsible in that speech. Grant Robertson at the end, he gave a good sort of pitch to say he's being very responsible. It just goes on and on. It's quite incredible. But it was a grovelling speech. It's a bit like saying, I want the Diet Coke to go with the double quarter-pounder meal. Do you know what I mean? I feel better, because I'm trying to do that. But that's what's happened here. But he's like an addict, again, who says, I don't have a problem, I'm going to be better this time, I promise. And we've had 6 of these things now, and he keeps saying I'll get better each and every time, but it hasn't been the case. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about tax, because it is incredible that under Labor, it's always a time to spend up, but it's never a time for tax relief for the good, hard-working people of New Zealand. They're happy inflation-adjusting benefits. They're happy inflation-adjusting the minimum wage. They're happy inflation-adjusting superannuation payments and departmental budgets, but they refuse to inflation-adjust tax thresholds for hard-working Kiwis getting up and going to work each day. And I'll tell you why they won't do it. It's because they've got a culture of entitlement at the heart of this government, right? They think they're entitled to your money. They think they're entitled to waste it. And as we've seen over the last few months, with all the shenanigans and all the comings and goings, they think they're entitled to rule. And that's just not the case. So sun, wind, rain or shine, Chris Hipkins and Grant Robertson keep coming up with excuses about why Kiwis don't get their own money back, why they can't spend it as they see fit. And that's because they've got an addiction to spending. $1 billion more each and every week is what they're spending. $100 million extra in tax is what they're raising each and every day. And they have carried on failing to address the drivers of the cost of living crisis, failing to do anything to grow the economy, and failing to deliver meaningful tax relief for New Zealanders. And I want you to be under no illusions, because if they get back in later this year, they are going to hit Kiwis with more taxes, because the addiction to spending doesn't go away. You've got to go find the money to pay for it. And Chris Hipkins, he supported David Parker. David Parker, he noodles away on his Piketty project. He's the great man who gave us that genius idea of the Kiwi Saver tax. Remember that one? Yep. So he's down there in the basement somewhere, and he's noodling away, and he's dreaming up new ways for new taxes. Because they need it, right? They need it. They need to keep new taxes so they can fund that addiction that they've got going on. And that's why you won't hear Chris Hipkins rule out a capital gains tax, will you? You won't hear him rule out a wealth tax. He's still got David working away on it. You won't hear him ruling out an inheritance tax. But I want New Zealanders to be under no illusion. It's coming. It's coming. If they get back in, they're going there. Rest assured, they have to go there because they've got such an addiction to spending. They've got so many deficits and so much more debt to pay off. So I want to say to all Kiwis, if you've got a farm, watch out. If you've got a KiwiSaver account, watch out. I want to say to you, if you're doing the right thing, trying to build up a nest egg for the future, watch out because they're coming for you. They are coming for you, no doubt about it. Now,
Well, I'm joined by Auckland Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Simon Bridges. Simon, thanks so much for coming in.
Afternoon.
Better to be in Auckland than Wellington today, feels good?
So much better. So much better to be a commentator than a participant.
Good to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. First off, what's in this budget for business?
I think if you look at it, it's an election year budget. It's not the back to basics sort of budget that had been billed as, and I think that business was expecting. So what you've got is goodies, welfare for households. I'm not necessarily knocking that actually. In an SME survey we did, it was quite clear they did think health, education, cost of living issues were really important and required funding. I think the worry about that though is that will fuel interest rates and inflation. They'll keep them higher for longer. That would be a worry for business. From a business perspective, in a pure sense, I'm not sure that there's a lot there for your average small, medium size or even bigger business.
Yeah, on your point there about higher interest rates, if this higher inflation for longer does flow through to more Reserve Bank action and higher interest rates at a high level and also there for longer, how much would that hurt businesses? Can you give me anecdotally some evidence of just how much they're struggling at the moment and how difficult higher rates would be?
Well, it hurts because it already hurts, right? I mean, I think if you take the mentality of a small or a medium business right now, say in Auckland, it's a situation where, look, they've got through COVID, they survived that, then they've had minimum wage hikes, then they've had flood, cyclone. They're kind of sitting there saying, what else is going to be thrown in us? And so from that perspective, if you look at this budget, look, as I say, from a household perspective, there may be quite a bit there for you. From a business perspective, and not so much. And interest rates and inflation staying longer, that's a real worry indeed.
Now, based on your survey that you released just yesterday, actually, business owners said that they did want to see top priorities, delivery on core services and economic resilience.
Yeah.
Has the balance been struck correctly between those?
I'm not sure that it has from a business perspective. I think that first part is there, that sort of focus on delivery of core services. You can see, as I say, some goodies in that regard, whether it's public transport, whether it's prescriptions, all the like there. But on the other side of the ledger, not there. I think what also came through in our survey was a sense, really underlying the survey, we want to see a more productive economy where businesses are out there and able to do more. And again, I don't know that much of that long-term picture is there. There's some good stuff. There's a tax incentive for gaming. That's fantastic. We've been calling for that. That's absolutely right. That will result in $1 billion sector, and that's, as I say, great. On the other side of it, though, you see tax increase around trust. That will affect a number of small, medium-sized businesses where that's their kind of their nest egg. I think the other point here is around infrastructure, where what we see is, yes, some spending, but when you take into account the fact that much of it's going to be on rebuild, and rightly so, much of it's going to be on public transport investment, how much is there actually left for genuine improvements of our big long-term issues? When Grant Robertson himself has said we have a major infrastructure deficit in this country. But
a lot of those repairs are needed to reconnect businesses with their customers, correct? So surely they would have been pleased to hear all of those rebuild costs coming out today.
Totally right. It's good, it's necessary. I suppose the point is, for a higher wage productive economy, is it sufficient? And that's the question. Look, I think it's an election year budget. There's some goodies there for households. Was there much there to turn the dial in a longer term sense? Not so sure.
Speaking of turning the dial though, businesses obviously do want to see investment in skills and education.
Yeah, you bet.
They got that today. What do you think their reaction to that education spend will be?
Oh, really good. I mean, of course, if you think about infrastructure, for example, truck drivers, the people who are going to do the concreting and so on, that is a big task. Having them trained up and ready to go is amazing. The truth is, on that though, we've got big capacity issues. We need tens of thousands of people. I'm not exactly sure at this time where they're coming from.
public transport, some of that's going to be subsidised more so for younger people, but there will be a pay rise there for bus drivers too. More people will probably turn up to work on time. That would be good for business owners.
I think all of that is good. I think there's a bunch of things there that, Mum and Dad in West Auckland, South Auckland, Hawke's Bay are going to say, this is right. I still say though, in terms of a business budget, was this a budget for business? No, I don't think we can say that.
We've spoken about the economy a bit, and this was something that was, very, very heavily spoken about in the lead up to this. Whether or not this budget will balance short-term needs versus long-term investment. You've basically said you're disappointed on the long-term investment on infrastructure side, but net, where do you think this stacks up on that balance for both of those?
I think it probably achieves what Grant Robertson and Chris Hipkins are trying to do here in terms of getting households to say, yeah, you know what, there's something here for me, and that's going to help. I don't think it was a move to the right. I think it's probably a Labour Party election year budget.
On infrastructure, Grant Robertson wants to build it. He says we can fix it, but businesses and their workers have to do that. Can they? Do they have the skills and capacity to do it?
That's a real worry. It's thousands, tens of thousands of people who are trained up and ready to go that are required. They're not there right at the moment. I think the other major question mark that the numbers are going to have to be dug into is by the time you've invested in rebuilding in Napier and Gisborne and Auckland after floods and cyclone, by the time you've paid those public transport subsidies, which only ever go one way and that's up, how much is genuinely left for the long-term infrastructure job that we need to do in New Zealand? The things that the Labour government's spoken of, Auckland Light Rail, Waimata Harbour Crossing, I'm not sure we see funding for those.
No recession. Positive news.
It's good news, and I think, that it definitely makes a difference. I think that's the reality for a lot of businesses. They are making money, but they're a bit grumpy because they've got this interest rate, this inflation pressure, their costs and their profitability are really affected by that. But the reality is we are an economy where right now, for the most part, if you want a job, you've got one.
It is a pretty slowing economy though. Things are certainly tough out there for everyone, especially for business owners with those inflated costs at the moment. Do you think they might see that key economic projection from Treasury and say, well, you might not think that we're heading for a recession, but we certainly feel like we are?
There's no doubt, and economists speak about this. Reading, I think, Paul Krugman today in the Australian Financial Review talking about there's a big difference between sentiment and sometimes what the economic numbers say. Now, the sentiment's not wrong, actually. I've given you a raft of reasons why businesses are pretty grumpy about things. They're still maybe making money, they've still got their head above water, but let's not pretend it's easy. No, actually, it's pretty tough.
Crime, a really big problem for business owners, especially in Auckland. Ram raids are massive. Was there anything in this budget for them?
It looks like investment's gone up. I think the point I would make, and I've made around, some horrific violence we've seen in the city over the last few days, is that it is a funding question. That does, I think, and I hope, mean more, if I can put it this way, bobbies on the beat, more of a presence. We want that. But what's also true is and as important as the policies that they follow. So I think what we want to see is not only the police presence, we want to see them taking a stronger line. If you take Auckland, for example, our city centre has some real issues, and if we want a strong commercial centre here, it needs to be safe and perceived as such.
Now, you wore blue today, so I feel like I'm allowed to ask you some political questions.
I always wear blue, don't read anything into it.
Once a Nat leader, always a Nat leader, right, Simon? How can the Nats argue with this one, given that it is targeted support for children, for parents?
Yeah, I don't know that they necessarily argue those specific measures. I think what they're doing, we can see just from the speech we saw from Chris Luxon, is attacking it on the basis that it wasn't what it said on the tin. I mean, Nicola Willis talked about the gaslighting effect in terms of, the government saying this was a budget around restraint, bread and butter, where actually it's been a bit more than that. I think this is the kind of budget where people read into it what they want. If you're on the left, you'll say, fantastic, there's investment in the things we want to see. If you're on the right, you say, fantastic, from a political perspective at least, it hasn't shown the restraint we think was required. So it's a bit in the eye of the beholder, I suppose.
One word to sum it up?
Election year budget, that's 3 words, sorry.
That is 3, I'm glad you can't count. Simon Bridges, thank you so much for joining us. All right, well, we do have Chris Hipkins speaking in Parliament. We'll go to the Prime Minister now.
A day for plans, a day for vision. We just heard none of those things from the Leader of the Opposition. Mr Speaker, the biggest blowout that we have seen today was the release of hot air from the Leader of the Opposition opposite It is no wonder his own colleagues have started to refer to him as Captain Cliché, because after 3 years to come up with a credible plan for what National would do for New Zealanders, we heard nothing today from the Leader of the Opposition about what a national government would stand for, about what a national government would do. All we heard, as we have heard for the last 3 years, is more running down of the New Zealand economy, more running down of New Zealanders. How out of touch can you get? Mr. Speaker, this is a great day for New Zealanders. It is a great budget for Kiwi families. In a cost of living crisis, New Zealanders know that they can trust this government to have their backs and to work to ease the pressure that they face, because that is exactly what we have done today. We know that families are under the pump at the moment and that they are feeling the pressure. We know that household budgets are stretched, and the answer to that needed to be a budget that is going to support families not just now but also in the future, one that lays the foundations for a better future for New Zealand, because that is what this budget does. This budget unashamedly is about balance. It is a proudly Labour budget, about making targeted and affordable investments in the cost of living, in providing relief for New Zealanders who are needing that, and it is also about making sure that the future can be better. When I became Prime Minister in January, Mr. Speaker, I said that we would get back to basics, and that is what we have been doing. I said that we would prioritise bread and butter issues like the cost of living and investing in the public services that New Zealanders rely on every day, and that is what this budget does. I said that we would be focused on infrastructure, because this is the government of infrastructure. You might hear others talking about it, but they don't deliver. This is the government that is delivering when it comes to infrastructure. This is a government focused on creating the conditions for a growing economy. Mr. Speaker, I heard the message from New Zealanders that they thought in some areas we were doing too much, too fast, and that they wanted to see us focus on the basic issues that are affecting them right here and right now, and that is what we have been doing. The first step of that was a reprioritisation exercise, making sure that the government's energy, its resources and funding are focused on the issues that are most important to New Zealanders right now. And that meant focusing on the issues that are about supporting working families, supporting people in need, supporting our businesses and building the infrastructure that we need, and that is what we have focused on. We have saved $4 billion in this budget to reinvest in those most important priorities, to focus on the things that matter. We've continued to deliver for families, for students, for older New Zealanders. We've freed up more money and more resource so that we can focus on making sure businesses have access to the skilled labour that they need. We have continued to boost funding for the public services that New Zealanders rely on every day. And of course, I am very proud of the work that we have done in the past few months to progress our international trade agenda, including through bringing into force the free trade agreement with the United Kingdom, something that is going to be a boon for New Zealand exporters. We've continued to work on improving the pay and conditions of New Zealand workers, because on this side of the House we believe if you work hard you should be able to get ahead, and that is not the preserve only of those on the highest incomes. It should go to those who are on the lowest incomes as well. We don't call them bottom feeders on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. We call them Kiwi workers, and they deserve a government that's got their backs, and that's what they have. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that is focused on ensuring that New Zealanders get the support that they need and that our Kiwi kids get the best start in life possible. And I am so proud of the work that this government has been doing in that area. I'm also proud of the work that we have been doing to support older New Zealanders. Increasing superannuation, one of the biggest increases to superannuations our older New Zealanders have seen in quite some time. Minimum wage increases to make sure that the Kiwis who go out to work every day and flog their guts out actually get rewarded for that and can actually make ends meet. making sure that our benefits are keeping up with the rising cost of living, providing support for students. These are all things we have invested in this year's budget. We've supported over 1 million Kiwis with the winter energy payment. Thank you, Grant Robertson, for that. We are building 3,000 new classrooms because we are not content to have kids learning in hallways and gymnasiums and libraries, which is the situation we inherited from the last government. And we are very close to putting 1,800 extra police, 1,800 extra police on the beat since we became the government. Because under the last government, the ratio of police to New Zealanders went backwards. We have been focused on keeping our communities safer by putting more cops on the beat. Because again, they might talk a big game when it comes to law and order, but they just don't deliver. And Mr. Speaker, I make no apology for the fact that under this government, our teachers, our nurses, our doctors, our firefighters, our police, our social workers, our frontline public servants have been receiving the pay increases that they deserve, which stands in stark contrast to the 9 years prior to the time that we became the government. Mr. Speaker, I want a country where if you work hard, you can get ahead. I want to live in a New Zealand where the circumstances into which you were born do not dictate the opportunities that you have in life or hold you back. I want a country where parents who work hard can provide a better life for their children, a better life than the one that they might have had through their hard work. I want to live in a New Zealand where effort and contribution are recognised and celebrated and rewarded, and where all New Zealanders get a share in the future prosperity of this country. I want to live in a country that is proud to care for the most vulnerable among us, and that is what our government is delivering. But, Mr. Speaker, I also want New Zealand to be a country that is optimistic about the future, that is outward-looking and that is confident and that is ready to take on the world, and that is what this government is committed to delivering. We are not running down the country, Mr. Speaker. We are proud of New Zealand, we are proud to be Kiwis, and we are proud to represent New Zealand on the world stage with optimism, with confidence, because we know that that is what is going to deliver a better deal and a better economy for New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, I spoke about the work that we did after I became Prime Minister around reprioritisation, and today's budget is the second step in that plan. It is the budget that sets out new focus and new direction, one that supports Kiwi families today and builds for tomorrow. The cost of living package in this budget will make a real difference for millions of New Zealanders, and it will make lives better. Mr. Speaker, one of the best investments we can make as a country is the investment we make in our children and in our tamariki. And I am so proud of the work that we are doing in early childhood education. Through this budget, 40,000 additional Kiwi kids will be eligible for 20 hours a week free early childhood education. It was a Labour government that introduced 20 hours a week free early childhood education, and it is a Labour government that is expanding it. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to addressing issues around the cost of healthcare and making sure that cost is not a barrier to Kiwis living healthy lives. The work that we are doing in this budget to scrap the $5 prescription co-charge will deliver for New Zealanders. It will help to keep people out of the health system when they don't need to be there. It will help those New Zealanders, those New Zealanders who aren't collecting their prescriptions because they can't afford to have them. And those are many of the same Kiwis that end up in our health system avoidably because cost is a barrier. The work to scrap the co-payment is in stark contrast with the last government who increased it. When the times got tough, when the going got tough, they decided to clobber New Zealanders who needed healthcare by increasing co-payments for prescriptions. Our government recognises that when times are tough, making sure Kiwis can access the healthcare they need is one of the most important things that a government can do, and that is exactly what we are doing. 135,000 New Zealanders reportedly went without collecting their prescriptions because they couldn't afford to collect them. This budget delivers for them. It delivers for elderly New Zealanders who rely on those prescriptions. It makes sure that Kiwis can access the health care that they need. Costs should not be a barrier to health care. But furthermore, there is more around the cost of living. Making sure that Kiwis can get around is also a very important priority for this government. And this year's budget extends free public transport for 5 to 12-year-olds indefinitely so that our children can get around on free public transport. And it extends half-price public transport for 13 to 25-year-olds. A real boon for our students getting around, a real saving to Kiwi families who are wanting to support their kids through their educational journey. It will make a very big difference. 1.6 million New Zealanders now eligible for free or half-price public transport. To put that into context, for the average Kiwi family with 2 kids using public transport each week, they will be saving $30 a week. That is going to make a difference. Since coming into government, we have provided cheaper public transport fares for 2.7 million New Zealanders. And we're working to reduce their power bills too, with the Warmer Kiwi Homes retrofits. 100,000 more homes warmer and drier because of the investments that we are making in this year's budget. Mr. Speaker, we know that after the last 18 months, it's been tough for New Zealand families. Treasury is now forecasting yearly economic growth of 3.2%, and they are suggesting that we could avoid a recession altogether. That's not by accident. That's by careful economic management, and I want to acknowledge the work of our Finance Minister Grant Robertson and his careful stewardship of our finances. Most importantly, the Treasury are forecasting that our inflation rate will get back to within the 1 to 3% target rate by the end of next year. That will help New Zealand families to get ahead. One of the most important things that we can do in this budget is to make sure that we keep the inflation rate pointing downwards, and that is what this budget has been focused on doing. But budgets need to be about more than just the here and now. They've got to also be about investing for the future. Even in a cost of living crisis, we need to be building for tomorrow and planning to come out the other side of the economic challenge that we have experienced. This budget sets aside an additional $6 billion to build community resilience. And haven't the events of the recent 6 months shown just how important that is? We want to build back better. We want to build back more resilient, and that is what we will do. We inherited a housing crisis when we became the government. And if there's one thing you know about a housing crisis, it's you don't hock off the limited affordable rental houses you have, you build some more. And that is what this government is doing. And that work is continuing with the extra 3,000 public homes that we are investing in this year's budget. I make no apology for the fact that we are spending an extra $1 billion on our health workforce. The people who go out there and deal with some of our most vulnerable New Zealanders every day, they deserve it. Our budget is backing our exporters, and it's backing new and emerging sectors of our economy, our game developers, our digital and tech sectors, because we know those are where the jobs of the future are going to be. In the 20 minutes of hot air that we just heard, nowhere did we hear any suggestion of where the National Party think the jobs of the future are going to come from. Not one new idea about creating a higher value economy or how we could grow the economy, how we could grow incomes. Nothing from them about it. But we did hear about that in the budget, because that is what the budget is going to help to deliver for New Zealand. This is a positive and pragmatic budget. We're looking at the programs that work, and we're making sure that they continue. A program I am very proud of is the Apprenticeship Boost program. After the global financial crisis, what did we see happen with apprenticeships under the last National government? We saw them reducing the number of people in apprenticeships. If we want to know why we've got critical skill shortages in areas like building and construction now, it was because of the underinvestment of the last government. We will not allow those mistakes to be repeated. Apprenticeship Boost is keeping our apprentices in work, and it is resulting in more people taking up apprenticeships. That is going to be good for our future as a country. And we are focused on making sure that we are increasing the opportunities for our exporters. This government doesn't just talk a big game when it comes to international trade, we actually deliver. And if you look at the trade agreement signed by this government versus the trade agreement signed by that government, the last government, I will back this government every day of the week. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, when we go abroad, we're there to talk up New Zealand, not talk New Zealand down. We don't go around the world complaining Kiwi businesses are too soft. We go around the world promoting Kiwi businesses because we are backing Kiwi businesses to create jobs and to help New Zealanders to get ahead. Mr. Speaker, we know that there are serious issues facing New Zealand. And what have we heard from the opposition about what they might do and what their plans are? Well, so far, the biggest issue that seems to be confronting the National Party is that they think that they should start issuing tax receipts for New Zealanders. Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope the National Party kept their receipt the last time they traded in their leader, because I think there's a few backbenchers who are going to be looking for a refund. Because after that woeful contribution that we just heard, I can tell Nicola Willis is out of the House already because she's back in the boardrooms around Auckland touting her future prospects. Mr. Speaker, the coalition of cuts opposite has no positive and optimistic plan for the future of New Zealand. And we know what would happen under a national government. They haven't really said much, but we can read it in the tea leaves and we can read it in their statement. Apprenticeship boost gone. Fees free for those future workers like our future teachers, nurses, doctors. That would be gone under National. Progress on climate change gone. Winter energy payments finished. Free and healthy school lunches gone under National. School funding reduced. As for workers' pay and conditions, we know that they would be on the chopping block as well. Money for rail, state houses, money for rail chopped, state houses sold off because that's what they did last time. The 10 days of sick leave introduced under this government back on the chopping block under a national government. And I tell you, there's one thing New Zealanders can be certain of. Under a National Act government, one of the things that is absolutely clear, both of those parties want to cut superannuation. They have both made it clear that they have plans to reduce eligibility for superannuation in New Zealand. They are united on that. The only question is how deep are they going to cut it? And given the ACT Party, for all of their faults, at least they have a plan, which is more than the National Party have. So the team without a plan or the team with a plan, it's probably the ACT Party's plan that's going to hold sway. And New Zealanders should be very, very worried about that. Because the only thing that the ACT Party want to do, if David Seymour was Minister of Finance, which he seems to be lining up for under a government, he's nodding his head, the only thing that David Seymour wants to do is cut, cut and cut. That is what a National Act government would stand for. But Mr. Speaker, enough about them. Let's finish on a positive note. And that is, I want to thank Grant Robertson for the work that he has done to support Kiwi families, to support Kiwi businesses. We know that the global economic conditions that we have faced in this government have been tough. We know that there have been some tough choices in this budget, and we know that Grant Robertson has he always has, over the last 6 budgets, he has handled those well. He has given us a balanced approach to managing the New Zealand economy, one that is delivering for New Zealanders, one that will help to create a brighter future for New Zealand, not by ignoring the future, but by making sure that we are investing in it. This is a budget for the times. It is a no-frills budget that's delivering for New Zealanders. Well done, Grant Robertson. I am proud of the budget that you have delivered.
All right, well, I'm joined by former Labour Party campaign manager Shane DePoe. Shane, thank you so much for coming in. Fabulous to see you. Is this an election-winning budget from Labour? Is there enough sweetener in this for voters?
I think there is. I think this is clearly aligned to middle New Zealand. The 23 hours EC for tamariki 2 and under will put $140 back into those whānau pockets. And you know what they do with that medicine? They spend it locally, and that will help stimulate the economy. We've got more investment in infrastructure. Apprenticeships, you know, since 2021, apprenticeships have increased by 63%. There isn't a mechanism that I can think of that can help local business in terms better than in terms of training and upskilling their kaimahi, their workers. So I think it is.
Who are they trying to impress with this budget, do you think, Shane?
I think middle and struggle street, you know, but also trying to GDP debt ratio of about 22%, pretty much the average, and we'll be back in surplus 25-26.
That is a delay though, so that could be a little bit of a tough sell, right? We are going to be in debt for longer, inflation is going to stay higher for longer. What do you think voters will make of that? Will they buy what Labour's selling on that front?
I think that the immediate benefits will outweigh some of the things that do concern sort of middle New Zealand, and of course I think you've got increased bank rates that do affect a lot of particularly homeowners and tenants, but I think overall the picture is one that they'll deliver as much as possible to middle New Zealand and the folks in Struggle Street. And you have to remember, on top of this, in terms of previous announcements, we've had record increases for superannuitants, increases of the minimum wage and beneficiaries, so it's that total package.
You say Struggle Street.
Yeah.
Tell me just how much people are struggling. What are they facing?
They are. You know, food insecurity is a real issue in Aotearoa New Zealand. It has been for some time. Rents are going up. But, you know, the answer isn't to give people like me, I'm a landlord, I tell Aotearoa New Zealand that, to put more money in my pocket so I can spend an extra week in Europe next year. This is about putting money in the pockets of whānau and people that need it the most.
So certainly a Labour budget then, you think?
It is a Labour budget, and I have a little prediction. I think Labour will get a bit of a bounce as a result of this. I think there's nervousness in particularly in the National Party. There's this talk about Nicola Willis and business Aotearoa saying they need a change of leadership. I reckon this will hasten that.
This will be a bounce for how long? Will it take them through to October for the election?
I'm not sure it'll take them through to the election, but I can say any bounce upwards will worry National Party and their big business supporters. And I think the biggest loser out of this will be Luxon. What we saw today, Luxon was a garbled speech. I didn't see any vision in this, and I think that his role as the leader of the opposition is in real jeopardy. That's just my little prediction.
Take that as you will. Yeah. Politically, how hard of a budget do you think this was for not only Grant Robertson to deliver, but for Luxon to counter?
I think that Luxon ought to have had some vision in saying what the alternatives are, because the message that I get from Luxon is that, you know, landlords are going to be better off, that he's going to lower the taxes for the wealthy. I didn't see an alternative. I didn't see a vision. But probably some of that is due to the fact that ACT will, no doubt, if they're part of the coalition, they will manage the economy going forward, and not so much National.
Yeah, actually on that, ACT has already dropped their alternative budget.
Yes.
Do you think that the Nats should have also dropped one ahead of today?
I think so. I think they should have shown a bit of vision, and they should have shown a bit of agility, and you know, and the like. You know, the other thing that I picked up from this budget is the investment in the gaming industry. You know, I'm in the tech world. Gaming industry is $1 billion plus industry. Whilst they were at it, I reckon Labour should have looked at things like data centres and also building up that infrastructure. We've got more money for apprentices. I reckon coding and coders are like apprenticeships, and I think that's an area that we ought to focus on in the future. The digital economy is our major benefactor going forward. It certainly isn't in cow and cow milk.
Now, this budget was very big on that cyclone Gabrielle
Yes.
recovery and also the recovery from the
Yeah.
North Island floods. You've told me that your home was
Yeah.
impacted quite heavily by that Auckland flood. Are you impressed by this budget? Does that help you financially?
But, well, it doesn't help right now, and to be honest, I don't need a lot of financial help, but my whānau in Māngere and in West Auckland that were affected from the floods do. Look, we are in the middle of a climate crisis, and if we have new infrastructure that is better built to not only mitigate but to limit the climate crisis, Aotearoa New Zealand is collectively better off. So I think that this is a step in direction. To be fair, whether it was Labour or National, I think it's an imperative that both parties will deliver on, because we have no choice, we have to do it.
So just to get your clear answer on this, you think as a result of this budget that Labour will win the election come October?
I think this is a bounce for the left, and time will only tell. We're still some 5 months out, but I think the bounce in the polls will see quite possibly an end to Luxon as the leader of the opposition. That's the small political prediction I'm making today.
Hot take from you, Shay. We'll wait and see what those polls say. Thank you so much for coming in. Right, we're going to go to our political editor, Claire Truvette, who has been in Parliament speaking to political leaders. She is currently with James Shaw, co-leader of the Greens.
And now we have Green Party co-leader James Shaw. James Shaw, can I get your overall verdict
Thank you
on,
so much.
I guess, the cost of living? First up, cost of living measures in the budget, and whether you thought they went far enough and were targeted the right people.
Well, the Green Party is supporting this budget. There are a lot of good initiatives in here that will help people definitely with their cost of living and with other things like the climate crisis and so on. It won't surprise you to learn that the Green Party thinks that we could have gone further and faster in this budget, but of course, we are a different political party with different priorities than the Labour Party.
Where would you have wanted to go further?
In particular in the domain of tax reform. So obviously New Zealand has a deeply unfair tax system and huge wealth disparities. We thought that we could have done more to lift people out of poverty in this budget by having a fairer tax system.
Sorry, on the climate front, the infrastructure package for the resilience of the infrastructure after the cyclones and flooding, do you think that is a good use of $6 billion to start with?
Look, it's a good start. I have to say, given the massive infrastructure deficit that we have as a country and the challenges that we're facing as a result of these floods and storms that are supercharged by climate change, $6 billion will barely touch the sides. I mean, this is just to kind of get us through the cyclone recovery and to set up a much longer term system. But we, as a country, we're going to have to commit a substantial amount more to, over a much longer time period, to infrastructure build in this country.
And at the other end of the scale from the wealth tax proposal that you guys are looking at, people on very low incomes or low to middle incomes might have expected more out of this budget, given it was pegged as the cost of living budget. Do you think that they have been, might feel a little bit cheated today?
I think there are a number of things here that will make a real difference for people in their hip pocket. So, for example, there's free public transport for 12 years, people up to the age of 12, half price for people up to the age of 25, and that can make a massive difference for people. If you combine that with the extension of early childhood education to 2-year-olds, a family with children will have hundreds and hundreds more dollars in their pockets per week than they do at the moment.
So you're quite happy with it?
Well, not satisfied. As I said, the Green Party is a different political party. We do have our own priorities. We do think that there are political choices that could be made to really solve poverty, to solve the housing crisis, to solve the climate crisis, at least as far as it applies in Aotearoa. And in this budget, it was a more typically Labour incrementalist budget. But having said that, within the boundaries that they've set for themselves, I think that they have done a good job of addressing some of those challenges, including, like I say, a number of key things that the Green Party ourselves have been campaigning for many, many years.
So you'll be hoping for more on tax reform in the Labour Party's election tax policy then?
Well, we'll have to see what they've got to offer. Of course, we will be putting our own stall out during the course of the election campaign.
Okay, they're very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, now I'm joined by the Herald's Business Editorial Director, Fran O'Sullivan. Fran, lovely to have you in.
Thank you, Madison.
What do you make of this budget? I know that you speak to business executives and chair people very often. Will they be happy with this budget or not?
Look, I think there were pretty low expectations for this budget. I think there was a sense that the government would put a bit of sprinkle dust around the place and look after one or two people that are part of their own constituency. But the expectations were low, I have to say. What they will be looking for, though, is a pathway on resilience. That is something business cares about. They care that the economy gets off its knees, and they will be interested but sceptical of the Treasury forecast that, in fact, there'll be no recession.
Yeah, on that, what are business leaders telling you about how they're feeling at the moment? Is it a recessionary environment out there? Will they believe Treasury's forecast from today?
Well, there's always scepticism over Treasury's forecasts. They haven't proven to be particularly accurate over the years, but there's also quite a degree of ability to manipulate, if you like, by putting a fair degree of spending into the economy, which is what is happening. I think the big issue, though, is how the Reserve Bank reacts. Does the Reserve Bank, which has been crying out forever for the government to, monetary policy needs mates argument, whether in fact they'll be happy with the spending tap, which has actually been opened big time today.
Is this Grant Robertson going to war with Adrian Orr?
I think he's raised the stakes, put it that way, and it's almost like I'm calling you. Will that bet play off? I guess time will tell. We'll start to see a bit of that next week, of course, with the OCR.
A big question, Fran, but do you think that this is a fiscally responsible budget?
I have my doubts about it, because largely where my doubts come in is to what happens with the election coming up. Clearly they're building a war chest for that, and that is pretty obvious by the spending track. How does that get used? How does it get used responsibly? And they're differentiated. I mean, this is, according to the press releases, a Chris Hipkins budget, not necessarily a government budget. So the war of the two Chris's has already been differentiated. So people know this is the impact of having a new Prime Minister. When it gets to the election, I'm not so certain about how this is going to play out. I think there's a lot of imponderables. And, are they responsible? I have a big question mark over that.
Do you think they're going to have to spend the next 5 months proving that they are fiscally responsible?
No, they're not going to do that. They're actually going to be thinking about what is the Labor policy for the election, and, will they have the guts to actually go and put in place some element of wealth taxes? I mean, they've closed the loophole on the trusts, which actually should have been closed when they introduced the 39% rate. It shouldn't have been left open for a couple of years. I mean, it was always going to be, a large amount of money evading, which it has evaded.
Thank you so much for your time, Fran. Now we're going to go back again to Claire Trevett, our political editor, who is currently with David Seymour, leader of the ACT Party.
Now we are with ACT Party leader David Seymour. David Seymour, I have seen from your initial reactions you're not impressed with the budget. Tell us why.
Look, it's a blowout. The $7.5 billion of borrowing next year, that was, just as recently as 6 months ago, Treasury said they'd borrow $500 million. Now they're proposing to borrow $7.5 billion. Now, when government borrows money like that, it causes inflation. Adrian Orr, the Reserve Bank governor, has been saying, I need the government to reel in its spending so I can get my job done getting inflation under control. These guys are going to kick off inflation like you wouldn't believe. Adrian Orr's going to react by putting up your mortgage rate, and I predict this year we will see 10-point floating mortgage interest rates. We've already seen the revisions going up from the ANZ and Westpac this week. With this shock, I think it's going to hurt everybody. And they say, we're doing this for the cost of living. The cost of living, well, yep. So, free train rides and bus rides for younger people, yep, not a bad idea. Free prescriptions for medicine, not a bad idea. Letting 2-year-olds go to ECE for 20 hours free ECE, yeah, I can understand that, because you need to invest younger if you want to really get development of young people working. Understand all that. But when you then go and run a reckless and irresponsible deficit of $7.5 billion, push up borrowing, push up inflation, push up interest rates, push up mortgages, push up rent, because landlords have mortgages too, all they're going to do is push up the price of living that will make those concessions and that new spending look like nothing.
They're still expecting inflation to drop down to within the 1 to 3% by September next year. Is that too long?
The same Treasury that said we would have 1.8% inflation now, 2 budgets ago, the same Treasury that said that inflation now would be 5.2% when it's actually 6.7 right now, that's the same Treasury that has been saying inflation has peaked and was under control. I think if you were to go over to the Reserve Bank and ask Adrian Orr right now what he thinks about those forecasts, he'll be saying things that we probably can't say on a live broadcast on an august platform like the New Zealand Herald.
So do you think that New Zealand mortgage holders should be braced for more interest rate increases?
Unquestionably, if $7.5 billion of deficit spending next year is not inflationary, if inflation doesn't lead to higher interest rates, and if that doesn't lead to higher mortgage rates, then I'm not quite sure which part of the economic picture Grant Robertson's missing. But anything they think they've done for the cost of living has been totally undone by their reckless and irresponsible expenditure blowout.
Grant Robertson said that the cost pressure increases alone ate up 80% of his operating allowance. How could he have avoided it?
Well, he's made a conscious choice to do a large amount of additional spending, but the other way he could have avoided it was not to start this train running in the first place. Remember, this is the government that borrowed $97 billion over 4 years, apparently to get through COVID, and every time they look for a new excuse to explain their latest spending splurge, used to be Vladimir Putin. Very bad man, but Vladimir is not the responsibility, doesn't hold the responsibility for oil prices, which are lower than before the war. They used to blame COVID. That's officially over. Now they want to blame the cyclone, but unfortunately, the cyclone recovery is $1 billion. They're borrowing $7 billion. They may well have inflationary pressures that are of their own making, but that doesn't explain the $7 billion blowout that is going to be highly inflationary and make their own job even harder.
Do you think Te Matatini deserved to get the extra funding it got?
I haven't looked that far into the budget. But you're welcome to tell me about.
It is now getting about $17 million a year, up from about $2 million a year, so it's getting slightly more than the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra.
1.7 or 7.0?
1.7 million.
Look, I think if you see the number of people that enjoy that festival, then it might not be an unreasonable expenditure. The real question is, why is the New Zealand government so invested in video games? That's $160 million in rebates for people that write video games. Now, you've got to ask yourself, is this a genuine investment with a good business case? Or is this something that seems a bit sexy? The Minister thinks he'll get a good photo op with video game programmers, and he's written a cheque for $160 million. I suspect it will be the latter.
So you're missing the bon mot of your potential future partner, Christopher Luxon, in Parliament, so we'll let you go. Thank you.
Look, thank you very much. Bye. Okay. All right.
All right, let's put the politics aside just for 1 second, because undoubtedly one of the most important things when it comes to any Crown budget is actually the numbers. Now, whenever I'm in a budget lockup, I'll typically get the Treasury's books and I'll flip it over and open it backwards, because that is where they tell us the key economic indicators, which paints the picture of what Treasury does think is going to happen to our economy for the next 3 years at least. Now, this is one of the first times I'm seeing the numbers. We're going to be doing this off the cuff together. Let's take a look. Inflation, a very important one. Based on these forecasts, Treasury does think inflation is going to be higher for a longer period of time. That will not be good news to anybody at home or at work who is already struggling with the price of grocery bills and the price of things like petrol at the moment. So based off these forecasts, they think that inflation is going to peak at 6% in the year 2023. That's the year we're currently in, but it will get better. They think it'll come back down to something with a 3 or a 2 in front of it the next year and the year after that. Now, worth noting that that is actually back or within or sort of near the Reserve Bank of New Zealand's target range. So that is a more ideal number, but look, it is going to get worse before it gets better when it comes to inflation. GDP growth, this is how it's actually going to impact our economy. So this is how much economic growth or not growth that we're in to see over the next couple of years. Good news, there is no negative numbers here based on Treasury's forecasts. So Treasury thinks that we're going to keep growing, albeit at quite a slow rate. So they think 3% economic growth this year. It will actually get even smaller, 1%, before going back up to 2% next year. Good news with this, though, is that they are not forecasting a recession for New Zealand, although the growth is pretty menial. House prices are a very big topic of conversation for most Kiwis. You will see some negative numbers here. So after a huge increase in asset prices in the year 2020 to 2021 of almost 30%, we are now seeing declines in house prices. Treasury thinks that we're going to get a decline of about 13% this year. That's a pretty big double-digit decline number. They will keep declining the following year based on Treasury's predictions here, although it will be a single-digit number, close to sort of 5% of a decline next year, before actually returning to growth in the year 2025, albeit again a pretty small number, closer to sort of 3% growth. Unemployment, this is a very big topic at the moment. We've already done a lot of stories here with the Herald business team about a number of workers being laid off, particularly in the tech industry. Bad news here is that Treasury does think that unemployment rate is going to tick up and stay high for a while. So they think it's going to hit 5% next year. It's currently at a historic low, around sort of 3.5%. They do think it's going to end this year at 3.7% an annual unemployment rate. They do think it's going to get its highest 2025, 5.3%. What these numbers actually do mean for New Zealanders is that tens of thousands of people will lose their jobs. Wage growth is certainly a big topic of conversation for especially economists and the Reserve Bank of New Zealand at the moment. This whole discussion about whether or not wages are rising at the same pace of inflation. This can actually have quite a big impact on what the Reserve Bank of New Zealand does. And as we know, a lot of business owners at the moment are struggling with their employees coming to them for asking for pay rises to be able to pay for all of those inflated costs at the supermarket and at the fuel station at the moment. So Treasury does think that wages are going to rise, but they will actually start to ease back down in the next couple of years. So Treasury is predicting that wages will hit about 6.6% annual growth this year that we're currently in, before coming down ever so slightly to 5.7% and then coming down to a flat 5% wage growth by 2025. Well, that's it for these numbers here. We will have some more analysis of these economic indicators with NZIER Principal Economist Christina Leong in just a moment.
And we have with us now Nicola Willis, who is the National Party's finance spokesperson. Nicola, you've had an hour with the budget. What is your first impression of it?
This is Labour's blowout budget. They've blown their spending, they've increased their deficits and they've increased debt. There's not a dollar of tax relief in sight for working Kiwis. In fact, the only dish Grant Robertson is serving them up is more inflation and higher interest rates for their mortgages.
What concerns you most about the figures looking forward?
That there's such a blowout in spending. We're seeing a $7 billion addition to the deficit this year, with multi-billion dollars worth of deficit over the next 4 years, and debt increasing by by 17 billion in 2026. So the spending is out of control. Grant Robertson has been gaslighting in the past few weeks, saying, oh yes, we have to control spending. Well, instead, he's got his foot, he's put it on the accelerator, and he's pushing as hard as he can. New Zealanders are going to pay the price for that.
He's pointed to getting back into surplus within the same timeframe National did after the GFC, and the extra load on infrastructure spending, in particular from Cyclone Gabriel. Do you accept those?
No, because what he hasn't shown is any ability to control his spending. What this budget does is pile more and more spending, and the priority clearly, in the middle of a cost of living crisis that's gone on for 2 years, should have been providing some income relief for working New Zealanders. He's completely failed to do that, and instead he's spending even more. The conditions in which we're operating today are high inflation, high interest rates. A good finance minister would respond to those. He's just carried on spending like there's no tomorrow.
Do you agree with the need to spend more on infrastructure, in particular the $70 billion of projects coming out, and the $6 billion for the resilience infrastructure changes after the cyclone and flooding?
There is a need to increase spending on infrastructure, that is true. What we are concerned to see is that Grant Robertson is front-loading all of that. He's spending $10 billion up front, leaving only $3 billion for the infrastructure needs of the next 4 years. What that suggests to me is that this blown-out budget has a hole in it, that he's intending to spend even more in future years. So the question is, where is the reprioritisation that we were promised? Because our view has been, if you want to increase infrastructure spending, you have to show what you're not going to do. We would have taken light rail off the table. We would have taken the Lake Onslow project off the table. What's Grant Robertson taken off the table? Absolutely nothing.
Do you have what's your verdict, I guess, on expanding early childhood education for 2-year-olds?
We prefer National's Family Boost policy, which provides up to $75 a week childcare rebate for parents with children of any age in childcare under the age of 5. That obviously has wider application than the 2-year-old policy, and any parent who's had a 3 or 4-year-old in so-called 20 hours free knows it's not free, and this policy won't be either.
He says that providing income relief would have had an
only if it hadn't been funded through careful spending and reprioritisation. He could have done that, he chose not to. This is a big spending finance minister. This is the 6th budget in a row where he's blown his own operating allowance. He said that he'd be cutting back spending. In fact, he's spending more than he pledged to.
To talk more about the economics of this year's budget, I'm joined by NZIER's Principal Economist, Christina Leong. Christina, lovely to have you in here with us.
Kia ora.
Well, you've actually been looking at the numbers, so politics aside, is this budget inflationary?
So for that, we look at the fiscal impulse that the government has, the Treasury has in their budget, and what we see is that while it's still contractionary over a projection period, it's less so. So if you think about, for example, the rebuild, that's going to add a bit to inflation pressures in terms of that positive fiscal impulse. So what this all means is that it's likely to add a bit more to inflation pressures than what we're initially been expecting.
So based on the numbers, this is a more inflationary budget then?
That's what it would suggest, yes.
How would you think the Reserve Bank could react to this then? And we've already seen, a lift in forecast for the peak OCR. Westpac this week saying that they think the OCR could hike to as much as 6%. What do you think? Do you think that we'll start to see more predictions of a higher rate environment?
Yeah, so certainly for the Reserve Bank, its main focus is to bring inflation back towards its 1 to 3% inflation target band. And with that in mind, the fact that this budget suggests that it would boost inflation in the New Zealand economy, it does bring up the potential for a bit more in terms of interest rate increases down the track.
Treasury is saying that we're not going to be in a recession this year or next. How does that stack up to other economists' market forecasts at the moment?
So overall, our core expectation is that the New Zealand economy will narrowly miss a recession. Now, part of this reflects the fact that there's going to be the rebuild, given the severe weather conditions, the storms that we had early this year. So what this means is that with part of that rebuild helping to stimulate activity, we don't expect that there will be a recession. However, that said, of course, there is going to be that high degree of uncertainty, and do acknowledge that the risk of recession is still there.
Christina, can you just explain to us how a rebuild following something as devastating as a cyclone or a flood can actually stimulate the economy? Why is that in the long run positive for our economy?
So in the first instance, the destruction to crops, infrastructure and property, it does represent a wealth loss for the economy. So you can think of it as you're starting from a lower base. But that said, from that, you do need to rebuild the economic activity that comes out of that. It then will put upward pressure in terms of growth rates. So that's where you can think of it as growing a bit more, but from a lower level, given that wealth destruction that we've had.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Christina. Really appreciate you coming in. Fabulous to chat with you. All right, well, now we're going to go back to Claire, and she is speaking with the numbers man himself, man of the hour, Grant Robertson.
And we have with us. And with us now we have Finance Minister Grant Robertson.
Thank you so much.
Cool.
There's a bit of a lag.
In your speech in Parliament, you kept talking about the trade-offs that were required this year, but you still managed to blow your operating allowance, and there's been a massive increase in infrastructure spending and borrowing. What was the trade-off?
Well, the trade-off was a lot of programs that ministers might have wanted to advance. But what we've done is deliver the infrastructure we need. So if you look at the capital spending allowance, yes, that's gone up. We've had a massive cyclone. It's the second biggest weather event New Zealand's ever had to experience in our history. And so we have invested to be able to do that. I don't accept the blowout language. Our operating allowance has gone from $4.5 billion to $4.8 billion. And in between times, we had the cyclone. So we've responded to what's in front of us. At the end of the day, the big economic indicators here are good. We get ourselves back into surplus by the end of the forecast period, debt stays relatively low, and inflation comes down to 3% next year. So we've had to do a lot of things, face up to what's in front of us, but I do think we've got it right.
We do have very sluggish GDP growth for the next few years at least.
Certainly relative to what we've seen in some recent years, but still it averages out at about 2.3% over the forecast period. And given the conditions that we've been in now, I think that's still a pretty good result.
You said that the spending would start to go down after COVID because that was a big peak, big glut of spending, which I think most New Zealanders and yourself thought would be a short-term kind of thing. Why is it so hard to get that to trend down faster?
Two things. Firstly, it is a response to the cyclone, which is between $9 and $14 billion. Secondly, inflation has stayed higher for longer, and while that does, on the revenue side, help the government, on the expenditure side, we are in the same economy as other New Zealanders. So if you put those two things together, it is harder. Of course we could bring that spending down quicker, but that would mean cuts to public services that New Zealanders rely on, and we're just not prepared to do that.
You said that you'd gone to some efforts to try and provide cost of living assistance that wasn't going to be inflationary. What reassurances can you give that it won't be and mortgage holders won't see more increases to their interest rates?
What I can give the reassurance there is what is in the budget, which is a forecast that interest rates will start to come down, that inflation will be down to 3% by the end of next year. The kinds of cost of living things we've done are not about shoving big sums of money in people's pocket that they will then go and spend and it will be inflationary. It's about easing pressures over a period of time for those who've got kids in early childhood education, for people who are paying for their prescriptions. They are targeted, small-scale measures that make a difference but don't do the big job of exacerbating inflation.
And by and large, they target quite a small group of people. So on the other side of that, do you think that there will be a lot of New Zealanders who are disappointed that a budget which was billed as offering help for them on the cost of living front has delivered to such a small group other than the prescription charges?
I think it's targeted, and that's what we said we would do. But the thing that's putting pressure on New Zealanders is inflation. And this budget sees inflation come down to 3% next year and to 2.5% the year after. That's the thing that we needed to deliver for New Zealanders. Of course we would like to have given more in the cost of living space, but we ran the risk that we would make our inflation problem worse. We've targeted areas like healthcare, education, public transport. These are things that families rely on, that individuals rely on. We can help ease the pressure, but of course we can't do huge amounts of spending and expect that that won't have a consequence.
On the infrastructure front, the increase in ambitions and projects for infrastructure is massive. Do we actually have the capacity to deliver on it? Or does it depend on opening the immigration gates wider?
No, it's spread over time. I mean, that's the first thing. We can't spend all that money all in one go for exactly the reason that you're raising. Net immigration in this budget is forecast to be 66,000 this year and then go down to about 40,000 next year. That's still a sizable number of people coming in to New Zealand, but absolutely we have to cut our cloth when it comes to our capacity. But I think giving people the certainty that there will be infrastructure projects in the pipeline actually encourages companies to come and invest in the workforce here in New Zealand. So, that will take time. That's a 1 to 3 year program that we announced today with $6 billion. We're committed to making sure we rebuild after the cyclone. That's a huge job, and then get on with lowering the infrastructure deficit.
Should New Zealanders have any hope at all that the broader level cost of living assistance through a mechanism such as tax cuts will be included in the Labour manifesto?
We haven't set our manifesto yet, and when we do, we'll be announcing it and we'll be putting it out there. What we did say very clearly running into this budget was we didn't think the economic conditions right now were right for tax cuts. I think that is understood by most New Zealanders. We do what we can, but we bring inflation down.
Christopher Luxon said that the budget was like the government ordering a Diet Coke with a quarter pounder to make it feel better.
He's obsessed by McDonald's.
Is he?
I don't know, he worked there.
Oh yes, he did too. And do you think that this budget will do anything at all to help you win an election?
I think this is a budget that New Zealanders will see reflects the times they're living in. That we've got to support people as much as we can with the cost of living, deliver public services, start to invest in the next stages of our economy, but be careful with our spending. New Zealanders have been careful with their spending. I think they expect the government to produce a budget that is similar to that. So I think this is a budget that New Zealanders will know is the right one for the right time. We do have an election campaign coming up. We will be competing on our policies for the next 3 years, but I think this is a budget that's the right one for the right time, and I think New Zealanders will recognise that.
Is the trustee tax the first step toward a broader wealth tax?
Well, no, it's just exactly what it is. It's closing a loophole to make sure that the trustee rate and the top rate are the same. Future tax policy announcements will come as part of the election campaign.
You're wearing Michael Cullen's tie this budget. It is today's budget very similar to one he might have delivered back in, say, 2007, 2008. When he said to everyone, you only get bread and butter today, but jam might come tomorrow. Well, I'm a person who admired Michael's approach a lot. He delivered 9 budgets, and so there were a lot of different ideas within that. But I'm very proud to wear his tie. It meant a lot to me to be given it. Will you be giving jam tomorrow?
I think this is a budget that has a number of important things that will help people. I'll be focused on what I do tomorrow. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Grant.
Well, this year's budget was pitched as helping ease some of that cost of living pressure that New Zealand families really are feeling at the moment. To talk more about those people, I'm joined by our data journalist, Julia Gable. Julia, thanks so much for coming on. Lovely to have you here. I hear that you've been speaking to some people who are really holding out hope for this budget, a mum and a pensioner. What do they have to say about this?
Yeah, we've spoken to several people in the newsroom here. The pensioner that we spoke to, a man who lives in Auckland, was really holding out hope that there would be more support for people struggling on the pension, especially those that don't own their own home. He was happy to hear about the removal of the $5 co-payment prescription fee, but overall wanted to see more for those really struggling. On the family side of things, we spoke to a mother who was so happy to hear about the extension of the early childhood 20 hours free and is going to send her child earlier to a childcare centre because of that. On the other side, we also spoke to a mum who said this would have been a lifesaver if it had come earlier when her kids were younger. She had to borrow money to get her kids through that period before they could go. So I think overall happy with that early childhood extension especially.
Julia, you've been covering the cost of living crisis for many months now. Just how hard are New Zealand families, like those mums, you know, the other parents, the pensioners out there doing it in this type of time?
People are doing it tough right now because inflation is outstripping wage growth. And the cost of essentials, everyday things like food, is increasing a lot. I mean, food prices are a big issue, right? Fruit and vegetables alone in the last stats went up 22.5%. But I think an important thing to remember is our official inflation figure doesn't include mortgage interest payments. So the household living cost price index does and is a better reflection of that inflation faced by households. And that figure was higher, a whole percentage point higher than where our inflation sits. But on the kind of real lived experience side of things, I spoke to a tertiary student who's written off buying fruit and vegetables because they're so expensive. We've spoken to people who have no food, who are at food banks or have really tight food budgets. There was this one mother that I spoke to who her family had to move to a caravan park and she had to stop her kids from taking a banana out of the fruit bowl when they got home from school because she had budgeted so intensely that she wanted to make sure that they had food the next day. I spoke to a woman who runs a free shop that gives out food parcels, clothing, essentials, linen and things like that, and she said she had felt like people had started to give up, and by that she meant move out of the house and move into a van with their kids so they can remove that housing cost and at least they can pay for food. And a pensioner had also spoken about that sense of loneliness because the income, that fixed income, was too low to live a normal life.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Julia, and for your amazing work. You really are sharing the stories, heartbreaking stories, many of them, for those New Zealand families. I appreciate you coming on. All right, we're going to go to Claire now. Again, she is with also another man of the hour, Prime Minister Chris Hipkins. Will this be his last budget? I'm sure Claire will ask him. Here they are.
And with us now we have Prime Minister Chris Hipkins with what is his first budget as Prime Minister. But can you tell us, Mr Hipkins, how this differs from a budget that Jacinda Ardern might have delivered? What was the unique touch that you might have added?
Well, we're different people, but we're still part of the same government. Ultimately, we're focused on delivering, a balanced approach when it comes to managing the government's finances. We want to support New Zealanders through a difficult period, whilst making sure that we're making the sorts of investments that New Zealanders expect us to make in the future, and also making sure that we're helping to deal with the economic fundamentals. So we're helping to get inflation back down to within its target range, because we know that's one of the things that's really been hurting Kiwi families.
It's an election year. You resisted the lolly scramble that goes direct into taxpayers' pockets by and large. What do you think this budget will do to improve your chances of winning an election?
Ultimately, I think what New Zealanders will see is that we're being a responsible manager of the economy, and I think that that's something that they'll be looking for when it comes to the election. It is a difficult economic environment globally at the moment. We know that the cost of living is really biting into Kiwi household budgets. This budget has avoided the big spend up because we want to make sure that we're getting inflation back down again, because that's the thing that's actually hurting Kiwi households. So the investments that we've made, the spending decisions that we've made, have been targeted to helping ease some of the financial pressure Kiwi families are under, whilst also making sure that we don't make those pressures worse.
You pitched this in advance as a budget that would be aimed at delivering on the cost of living front to New Zealanders. The targeted assistance that you've provided is very targeted to quite a small group of people by and large. Do you think that there will be a lot of New Zealanders out there feeling a bit underwhelmed by what is on offer?
I was also pretty clear it was going to be a no-frills budget. One of the best things we can do to support New Zealanders with the rising cost of living is to make sure that we do get inflation back down again. The global economic headwinds that we've experienced that have kept inflation higher for longer are still with us, and so we've got to do our bit to make sure we get inflation back down. The Treasury forecasts indicate that inflation will be back down to within the target range by the end of next year. That is one of the things that we can do to support Kiwi families struggling with the cost of living, because if we don't do that, if we did a big spend up, that would just mean that inflation would stay higher for longer.
But despite not offering that direct assistance, the budget and what it does do already slows the pace of the drop in inflation marginally, but still nonetheless it doesn't do much to improve the pace at which it was going to drop off. So how do you justify that?
The budget's overall fiscal impulse, which is how we measure whether or not the government is adding to inflation or not, the fiscal impulse across the forecast period of the budget is still negative. It is still the government actually contributing to downward pressure on inflation.
Have you basically ruled out from your decision making today offering tax cuts in the next election?
I've been really clear all the way along that we'll set out our tax policy well before the election. We haven't done that today. What we've done is we've set out the tax policy that applies for this budget period, which is very consistent with the one that we campaigned on in 2020. We said that we would honour the commitments we made in 2020. We're sticking to that. We'll have new commitments in 2023. People will know that well before the election.
Is the change to the trustee tax rate, is that a step towards introducing more widely wealth kind of taxes, or is it what you'll do rather than go any further?
What we said in 2020 election is if we saw that New Zealanders were using trusts in order to avoid paying their share of tax, then we would do something about that. We have seen an increased use of tax by people who are seeking not to pay their fair share of tax, and that's the reason that we made the decision that we did in today's budget.
It's been described as a trade-off budget. Grant Robertson in particular has used that word, that things had to be traded off. What do you consider had to be traded off?
Well, all budgets are trade-off budgets. Ultimately, there's lots of things that governments would like to do. What we've got to do is make sure that we're managing the government's finances responsibly. There's always a laundry list or a shopping list of things that ministers and politicians would like to see in a budget. What we've had to do is prioritise very, very carefully. It's a limited range of new initiatives that we know will make a big difference to Kiwi families in terms of the cost of living. It's quite targeted. And then we've made sure that we're seeing our public servants and our public services keeping up with that rising cost, so that New Zealanders still need to know that the health system, the education system is still going to be able to deliver the level of support, the level of public service that they expect of it. We've made sure that that happens.
Why is it so hard to get government spending to track down after the glut years of COVID?
Well, as I've indicated, the overall fiscal impulse from the government is a negative one across the forecast period. But we have to. But if you look at the overall level of government expenditure relative to the size of the economy, yes, government spending has been growing, but so has the economy. Now it is a bit larger as a percentage of the economy to what it was when we became the government. But we're doing more things. We're supporting New Zealanders in new ways. But it is not a radical change relative to the size of government spending in proportion to the economy to what it was when we became the government.
Do you have a message for the New Zealanders out there who might be looking and thinking, there's not much in it for me?
Ultimately, the main thing that's in this budget for New Zealanders who might not see something of immediate benefit to them is that the budget's focused on getting inflation back down again, making sure that the cost of living that they experience on a day-to-day basis doesn't keep rising, because we know that that's the thing that's really hurting them and hurting their back pocket.
Is one of your aims in this budget to make a virtue out of not splashing the cash, to try and improve your credentials about being a good economic manager?
Well, this is a budget for the times. We have to recognise that the economic times that we're in at the moment are not the right time for a big spend up, and a big spend up includes tax cuts. A big tax cut package right now would ultimately lead in higher inflation for longer, and therefore higher interest rates for longer.
I believe there are some sausage cheese rolls cold in your office waiting for you, so we'll let you go.
Thank you.
All right, let's recap the major announcements from this year's budget, starting with health first. The government will be removing the $5 co-payment for all prescriptions. The cost of that will be $618 million over 4 years. They'll also be giving more money to help reduce waiting lists. That will cost $118 million. And another $100 million to boost primary care. There'll be $63 million for 500 extra nurses and $75 million more for Pharmac. For parents, 2-year-olds included in 20 hours of free early childhood education from March 2024 at a big cost of $1.2 billion over 4 years. That saves eligible parents on this policy about $133 a week. Subsidies for childcare centres rise by 5.3%, costing $260 million over 4 years. On infrastructure, after Cyclone Gabrielle and the North Island floods, telecommunications, power and roads, that will cost $6 billion. This is called the National Resilience Plan, and it will be set up with that initial funding of $6 billion. The first priority is to repair and rebuild telecommunications, energy and roading after Auckland flooding and Cyclone Gabrielle. Right, on public transport, there will be $327 million spent for free public transport for primary school aged children, half-price public transport for under 25s. That kicks in on 1st of July and will benefit about 774,000 New Zealanders. On to housing. $403 million will expand the scheme for heating and insulation installations for 100,000 more homes. 3,000 new public housing places there too. On the economy, inflation is forecast to drop to 3% by next September. Treasury is no longer forecasting a recession due to cyclone recovery stimulating the economy. Unemployment is forecast to peak at 5.3% in late 2024, and GDP is forecast at 3.2% this year, dropping to 1% next year. All right, our fiscal position, let's look at those Crown books. We will return to surplus in 2025 to 26. That is a 1-year delay from previous Treasury forecasts. Net debt is forecast to peak at 22% in 2024. Now, with any budget, we do get some surprises too. This is them. We will get $34 million in an increase in funding for Te Matatini over a 2-year period. That's up from just $3 million a year currently. This means the festival will get more funding than the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra for the first time. Also, there's a new 20% rebate for game development studios, allowing them to claim up to $3 million a year in rebates. Well, that is all for our live coverage of the 2023 budget here at the Herald. Thanks so much for joining me and our guests. This was fun. I'm sure we will be back again next year. There will also be much more analysis of all the news and numbers and more commentary from our reporters and our opinion writers too on the NZ Herald this evening and into tomorrow with the paper as well. Thanks again for joining me. Have a good evening.